This week, Mike Cohen from Rapid7 and Wes Lambert from Security Onion Solutions join us for a segment on Velociraptor Digging Deeper. Then we attempt to confirm or deny that Nzyme performs intelligent device fingerprinting and behavioral analytics to detect rogue actors. In the security news, what to do with your old hardware, renting your phone, persistently execute system software in the context of Windows, sensational headline, ransomware could cause a food shortage. Could someone please schedule the year of the Linux desktop? Public key crypto explained or not? Malware attacks from Windows through Linux. Microsoft Exchange auto discover bug leaks 100,000 credentials. And toilets that can identify you from, well, the bottom. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly. For security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing, known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker.
And welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man who got his enzymes all over the place this week, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 711, recorded on September 23rd, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. That's right, I am rocking the sport coat with the t-shirt to basically troll Chris Cochran from the Hacker Valley studio, because he's not the only podcast host that can rock the sport coat and the t-shirt.
I mean,
little trolling going on. Mr. Doug White is here.
It left me speechless to see you in a white sport coat and a pink crustacean or something like that.
No, I'm not Don Johnson on the set of Miami Vice now.
Where's Tubbs?
Hey, I'm over here.
He's in the evidence locker with the drugs.
Eyes up here. No, it's a great look. I mean, I'm very impressed.
My wife actually complimented me.
It's giving the show an air of respectability it doesn't deserve.
Yeah. Wait until we get through these martinis and some bourbon.
Well, yeah, and get the hammers out and start banging on the computer case. Like, I'll straighten that out.
If you haven't checked out Doug and I's video on building a computer, it's absolutely hilarious. There's multiple hammers involved.
Oh, yeah. It starts off with hammers.
In fact, one of our friends on Facebook was posting that her case had come damaged. And I'm like, we got you. We got you, my friend. I'm like,
a how-to video.
Yeah, a how-to video on how to. Except her case was I realized it was all glass.
but like you said, you got it, Lady Nikon. You're all squared away. They'll fix you up.
That's it. What's going on, Larry? Larry's here remotely. Larry's remote this week.
Yep. Yeah, no, doing a bit of teaching this week, so the schedule just didn't work out for me to make it to the studio. So here I am.
Good to have you, Larry. Mr. Tyler Robinson is here with us as well.
Buenos dias. Good to be back.
Nice to have you back, Ty. You were on a little trip. I won't say anything else, but you were on a little trip, and you're back from the little trip, and now I'm glad to have you back on the show. It's nice.
Thanks, buddy.
Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Hi, it's good to be back as well. Had a little fun up in Alaska. Now back in the lower 48. A little bit warmer.
I live vicariously through you, Lee.
Yeah, we all do.
In your travels. It was Hawaii, then Alaska. It's good to have you back as well.
As long as you don't live Viagra-ously through him.
That's a completely different thing. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's event. Here from Robert Herjavec, plus heads of security at NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners save 20% on the Digital Pass registration, as this is now an all-virtual event being held from November 9th through the 10th. You can visit securityweekly.com/ISW 2021 to register today. Joining us for this segment is Mike Cohen and Wes Lambert. Mike is a digital forensic researcher and founder of the Velociraptor project, and Wes is a principal engineer at Security Onion Solutions. They join us tonight to discuss Velociraptor. Welcome, Wes and Mike.
Hi.
Hello, and thank you. Hey, how's everybody doing tonight?
Doing great. I'll choose one of you at random. Wes, I want to, before we kind of dig into it, get to know you a little bit by asking you how you got your start in information security.
Sure. So, a while back, probably, let's see, was that?
The 80s? No,
not
that far back.
No, not the 80s. Look at me. I'm like, no. So I actually got my start, I was doing some system engineering stuff around identity and access management. So I kind of just started in a form for the most part of information security, maybe not as common as the one, the disciplines we all think of. Although it is a little bit more common today. You see IAM a lot more today, but kind of got my start in doing some kind of generic system engineering and IAM, and going from there and kind of going into the broad, every domain of InfoSec. And then recently, until about, I guess, 4 years back now. So it's been a little over 4 years. I've been with Security Onion Solutions, focusing on enterprise security monitoring. So things like network security monitoring and host-based monitoring, things like that. So that's kind of how I got in, and very briefly where I got today.
Fantastic. Mike, how'd you get your start in information security?
Oh, that shows my age, I guess. I've been in information security for well over 20 years. And I was working for the federal police and doing digital forensics. And I've been in digital forensics first, and then moved into enterprise DFIR later on. I joined Google in 2010 and worked with some, very excellent people and did some really cool stuff. And in 2018, I founded Velociraptor, which is an endpoint visibility tool or framework. And I joined Rapid7 this year to continue working on Velociraptor. So it's been a real fun ride so far.
Yeah, Mike, where are you from? I can't for the life of me pinpoint your accent.
Oh, I've lived all over the world. I was in Europe for many years with Google and in Seattle, and I've lived in the US. But currently I'm in Australia.
Okay.
I'm on the Gold Coast, which is, as you can see in my background, is a very sunny place. So yeah.
Yeah, I would have guessed Australian, but someone who traveled around a lot, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I guess my first question for either of you, right, is when we talk about Velociraptor in doing endpoint forensics, how is that different? Because we were just saying before the show, I've been playing around with things like OS Query, and how'd you say it, Wes? It was Waza or Wazoo?
Wazoo.
Wazoo.
Yep.
I like Wazoo better. It sounds better. And some of the log beats and things like that. So how does Velociraptor different from some of those other open source offerings that can give you some of that telemetry from your endpoints and hosts?
So the idea with Velociraptor is to move a lot of the forensic analysis that we typically do to the endpoint. So if you look at the standard, gold standard sort of in the industry today for, monitoring or log analysis or whatever, it would be you just kind of like hoover down all these event logs from the endpoint and then just shove them into a big backend like Elastic or Splunk or something like that, and then do these data mining kind of queries on it and try and figure out what's going on. And that's a good approach, but it doesn't really scale very easily. And the more machines that you're monitoring, the more you have to throw resources at the back end, because naturally everything is concentrated at the back end. And if you're just hoovering out all the evidence from the endpoint and you're shoving it all into one place, then that one place has to scale with the number of endpoints that you have. So the approach with Velociraptor is to move a lot of that analysis to the endpoint. So we're doing those queries on the endpoint itself. And by doing that, we can actually only surface high-level or high-valued events that we are sending, to the server. So we actually reduce all our complexity and make it much more scalable. And so, I guess, for the Velociraptor project, we've had a couple of good inspirations because, as you said, there are many very good open source tools out there. And OSQuery was certainly a wonderful inspiration for us. Because I think OSQuery was like the first tool that it actually proved the concept of, I'm going to make this query language where I'm going to push that query out to the endpoint, and then I'm going to be able to do that analysis or that filtering straight on the endpoint and just get back the information that I need, right? And I think that was really revolutionary, and it was an inspiration for us. So with Velociraptor, we just went, well, look, we think the query language is really kind of the future. It's really the way forward. So let's take that idea that OSQuery had with the SQL query, and we identified that SQL was just not a flexible, powerful enough language to actually go beyond, the capabilities of OSQuery. So we come up with a whole other query language, which is specifically designed to gain access to low-level forensic analysis type, information, and then just put that on the endpoint and develop that query language to the point where it can really do, a lot of very cool stuff, which goes above and beyond anything that's been done before, right? So certainly, it's kind of like you could think of it as like OSQuery, the next step, kind of,
It's interesting. Like sometimes people, I've been asked in the past, like, tell me an interesting story. And Doug's a bad example because he probably could. But most of us normal human beings, like we kind of freeze. Like, wait, of all the interesting stories that I have, and I've told a lot of really funny stories in the past, when you just get asked that one question, like, tell me an interesting story with no context, you tend to freeze. And that's kind of how I feel like, OSQuery and some of these other systems that you can ask it any question you want. And when I'm presented with the console, I'm like, this is great. And I'm like, wait, what am I going to ask it? So where do we start, Mike and Wes, in helping people, kind of guide them and give them some context on like what questions do you want to ask, and then maybe building on top of those?
Yeah, exactly. This is a really, really important point. With a lot of the OSQuery, like OSQuery is nice, and and Velociraptor is also the same thing. You can ask any query you want, right? But from a usability perspective, if you have to sit there and type an SQL query or VQL query to query the endpoint, there's kind of like so much that you can do, and it would just not be a great user experience as well. And you wouldn't remember what you're supposed to be typing as well. So, you end up with a lot of people, that use OSQuery and they have the little spreadsheet with, their queries, and they just like copy and paste, their query into the console or whatever, right? So what we decided to do in Velociraptor is go beyond that. So the query engine is the engine that makes it go, right? But it's not a great user interface, and we don't really want people to use that all the time as the first thing you do, right? So what we have is a concept called an artifact. And an artifact is a YAML file, which just basically like encapsulates the query. So it has the query in the YAML file, but then it has a name and a description and some parameters that you can use to manipulate the query. We're going to see that a little bit later in the demo, but it's basically designed to be user consumable. So the query side of it makes it really easy to customize and then basically implement whatever kind of security checks that you want. But then what is actually being consumed by the end user is that artifact, which is just available through the UI, and you just basically click on the artifact and run it, right? So we've got context, we've got parameters, and then we have some post-processing and reporting and all this sort of stuff, and that basically gets packaged in this YAML file. So most people don't really need to use VQL to actually use the product. You can just select what artifact they want, collect what they want, and go from there. Right.
Yeah, that's nice, because I think there's a lot of us listening that are like, wait, I got to learn another query language because there's so many of them today.
Right.
Sorry, Wes, were you going to say something?
No. I think I was just going to add on there, kind of as Mike was saying, just encapsulating that expert knowledge, right? You don't have to be an expert DFIR practitioner to be able to use Velociraptor and get really good results.
Wes, my question for you is: is it integrated with Security Onion, and how so?
Sure. So it is not currently integrated. I have been kind of doing some work on the side to integrate it myself and maintain that integration. And part of that was really to get, or really to bring Security Onion kind of full circle with that collection, detection, and response, right? So I think it adds, a complete other capability. While OS Query and Wazoo, they do have their capabilities and the ability to query and whatnot, but this really takes it to a whole nother level where you can use the platform along with Velociraptor to do almost everything you need to do in your enterprise security monitoring and response phase, right? So,
how does Velociraptor help with the response phase?
Sure. So, if you want to gather additional info from hosts, right, you're investigating something and maybe you're already collecting Windows logs, or maybe you're not, and you have this IP address with this host name, and you want to look further into that, you can use Velociraptor to go and dig further. You can gather host-based artifacts like processes in memory and MFT and USN journal. I mean, there's just it's the list goes on and on. But basically, you're able to do all of that remotely. You're able to see the results back in Security Onion and then correlate that activity and be able to kind of go from there. It's just gathering a lot more context and coming to a conclusion a lot more quickly.
Mm. Yeah.
How is that gathering data?
Also, this might be a slightly different approach, I guess. Like a lot of the other tools, OS Query, for instance, as a design philosophy is it's a read-only system, right? So a lot of tools go to extremes to prevent modifying the system, which is a good design goal, right? What we sort of did with Velociraptor is we basically realized that in order to respond to an incident, so that's the R in DFIR, well, you're going to need to modify the system, right? So we actually do allow modifying the system, with the controls and all this sort of stuff, right? So, for instance, if you have scheduled tasks that are, added by malware, then you want to actually be able to remediate that by removing them or modifying the system. So we do actually allow that, with suitable controls, and so we can use Velociraptor to do remediation, and we can discuss how risky that is depending on the situation and how well tested it is and so on. But it is possible to do remediation at scale, right? So if you have a big crypto miner infestation or something like that, then you can easily do a hunt in 2 minutes. You can clean up 2,000 machines, kind of thing, right?
Sorry, Tyler had a question.
No, yeah, I was kind of curious. How does the agent interact? I'm assuming it's an agent on each of the endpoint devices to be able to interact with that. Is it doing API calls or using WMI at a low level? What's the communication and the protocol look like? And then if it is doing that, is there any data correlation where you're sending that back to like a data lake? Or to a SIM integration so that you can query past and present, or is that all real time and kind of live?
So all of this is possible, right? Every single thing that you've said is possible because ultimately Velociraptor is just a query engine. So that's all it is, right? It just runs your queries, and whatever queries you choose to run, that's what it's going to do, right? So the query language provides the ability to do all those things that you mentioned, like WMI calls and API calls and other things, and even forensic analysis, looking at MFTs, looking at NTFS artifacts. All of these things are possible. We're looking at ETW and forwarding events. All of these things are accessible through queries, through VQL queries. And then depending on what query you want to run, then you just get your data. So you think of it as Velociraptor is kind of like the collection tool, and a lot of people take that data and then they feed it into something like Elastic or Splunk or another SIEM, and then to get that historical context if they want, A lot of people just collect the data and keep it as, big JSON files in S3 storage, so they can, go back and grab if they needed to. But, unless they actually need to query it, in a live database, there's no need to keep historical data for very long. So these are all possible. This is what makes the tool so exciting, is that it's so flexible, and the way that it's used is really kind of up to the user, right?
So my question with the endpoint processing is, how do we not DOS our endpoints? I mean,
that's an excellent question.
They're already mad at us for all the cyber stuff on the endpoint.
Yeah, excellent. So this is a very, very important question, and we need to make sure that our impact on the endpoint is very controlled. So when, depending on what you're doing, you might require a high CPU use, because let's say there is a very critical thing that you need to do, and you don't care, and then you need to do that. So to help you understand what the endpoint is doing, then we have a lot of tools, mechanisms in process. So the first mechanism is that we can collect telemetry every 10 seconds, like how much CPU are we using, how much memory are we using. This is happening automatically all the time, right? So you can go back historically and say, okay, on Tuesday at this time, the user complained that we were doing something, and here it is, that's how much CPU and resources we used. So we've got that constantly happening. And then one of the other really important differences between Velociraptor and OSQuery, for instance, is that Velociraptor is asynchronous and cancelable. So that means if I do a query and it turns out that it just doesn't work out, like it's consuming way too many resources, and it just I don't want to run it anymore, right? Like, so when I hit cancel, it immediately cancels that query, right? So it's immediately cancelable and controlled, right? So I don't have to. So unlike, because it's asynchronous, right? So unlike it's query where it's kind of like you fire and forget, and then if you get something back, then with OSQuery, we have like the nanny, and it checks that it checks that it's not using too many resources. Then it kills the thing if it does, and we actually have a cancelable. The VQL is cancelable, so we can cancel at any time. So that means that we can put resource limits on how much CPU it's going to use, how much memory it's going to use, and how long it runs for. So like by default, when you're running a query, it's 10 minutes. So like you're going to run this Yarrow scan for 10 minutes, and if it takes longer than 10 minutes, it will just cancel and stop, right? Because and then we'll have to go back and rethink our do we really want to run it for longer, or sometimes we do, so we can increase that. Sometimes we don't, right? Because this is like a nature of the FIR, because you're running on systems that you really don't know. So like a lot of the time we think that what we're doing is light, like we're going to just search through the internet history, where it turns out that this is a terminal services machine, and it has 200 users with like terabyte of internet history, right? You just don't know that in advance. So until you do it, so you need to have these kind of safeties built in, so that you can catch these problems and stop, right?
Well, being a mainframer from way back, I always have a lot of trust issues with endpoints. And since you're not bringing everything back to a central place, how do you protect against data loss out there on those endpoints if something happens to them? So you want to collect that data and something has happened to the endpoint. Can you, is it just gone, or how do you get that information?
So it depends so when you say collect the data, right? In DFIR, like data that's 2 days old is not relevant, right? We just don't care about it. Mm-hmm. Like if you want to look at the process listing and it's 2 days old, mm-hmm. Unless you were owned at that time, then, going back to it is not really helpful. So a lot of the data that we collect that, just in case, is not that useful as we would like, right? So what I'd like to think, I like to think of it as basically saying, well, the endpoint is the ultimate source of truth, right? And so when we have the ability to query the endpoint, it's like having a distributed database, and you're just saying, hey, tell me what's the state right now, right? So you're basically querying the state of the system, right now. And the historical thing is less useful because, if I want to know what processes are running, well, the processes that ran last week, are not that relevant because I can't really pivot into them and look at them more. And, I want to be able to do that.
Well, I guess I was thinking more like, okay, 2 minutes ago, that endpoint ceased to exist. I don't see it anymore. I can't query it. Right. Is that data encapsulated somehow so I can go back to that endpoint and say what happened? Why did you cease to exist? I mean, is that protected somehow there?
Well, I mean, the data that's been collected so far, of course, is still stored on the server, right? So you can still collect data, right? So it's not just, for example, like I can run a hunt and collect prefetch data for all machines, at a certain point in time. It's kind of like, so we are capturing the data, right?
Okay.
On the server. So it doesn't cease to exist. We can go back to look at it. But, if the machine fell off the network and you don't know why, I mean, that's still not going to help you, right? Because you still don't know why, right? It could have just been stolen or unplugged or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I was thinking the data. I was thinking the data was sitting on the endpoint, not on the server.
No. I mean, we still collect stuff, right? We collect all the data to the server and we push it up, right? But what we're looking for is, so for instance, like let's say that we're looking for certain detections, that we're looking for example, malicious processes running or registry keys changing or whatever, right? So I guess my point earlier was about traditional sysmon style monitoring, where you're just basically forwarding all registry changes and all process things, and then on the server you're saying, oh, did this key change? Because that indicates something, right? Well, that's not scalable because I have to forward every single registry change and then do this querying on the server, right? Whereas the Velociraptor approach is to just go, did this key change? So you just immediately ask for it on the endpoint to say when it's changed, and that changes the response because it means that the endpoint knows immediately when the key changed, right? So if you're watching a particular key and you're saying, I want to know whether it changed, then you can tell immediately that it happened, right? Because you have this query running, then it basically does this checking on the endpoint. And then you can, in the query itself, you can say, well, do something about it, right? If this happens, then do something about it. So the response is kind of built into the query because, again, VQL can actually respond because it can change the state of the system. So you can write, queries that do things that can take action when something happens, rather than, the current state of affairs where you're just kind of like forwarding all the events to the endpoint, to the backend, and then doing some Splunk queries. And then at some point you detect there is some problem, and then you try and go back and escalate to do this remediation. But, there is this kind of like long loop, this OODA loop, right, where we are going back to identify the issue and then coming back to the endpoint and trying to correct it. Well, you could actually program all of that into the query so that it automatically does it. So, if it detects, PSExec running, then immediately it alerts, but it may also, shut down the servers or whatever, like these kind of things, right?
I remember the days when doing forensics was I had to physically go somewhere and run things like TCP view and all these other tools, right? Forensics tools on the systems to determine if they were compromised. And I remember being at the university, and sometimes I had to go into like really strange places. Universities have strange places. Like I had to put on booties over my shoes and walk through doors that had like, danger, biohazard, radioactive waste. And I'm like, whoa, wait, I'm not going in there. And they're like, oh no, we just put that sign there so people don't bug us. It was very strange. This sounds like a way that I can do all that remotely, basically, right? Do all those forensics to determine if this machine has become compromised and even take some action, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like a lot of the work that we do are for things that are really inaccessible. So we've had some clients that are, like mining companies that work in some really remote areas. And they might say, hey, this box comes up, once to check their email, like every 2 days, because they just have no reception. They are like out there somewhere, really remote. So this is actually also another aspect is that some of the other tools, you can only really talk to the machine when it's on the network, right? So it's kind of like a live thing, right? But with Velociraptor, what we do is when you're doing collecting an artifact or collecting some queries, is that you're scheduling them. And so when the machine is offline, it just kind of like sits there. The server says, okay, when it comes back online, I'll schedule that. And so when it comes back online, it will just run the query, collect the results, and then you'll be able to see it again. So I don't have to kind of like time zone chase this machine that, just comes up 10 minutes every two days, right? So
it's open source. So does that mean I can get it and use it at school?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I like to ask that question.
Yeah, totally open source, and it's on GitHub, and we have a community on Discord as well. Jump on and have a chat with us. And if you have ideas, questions, we're always there.
That's cool. I mean, it sounds like a really interesting product because I was in a meeting earlier today where people were asking those very kind of questions about how do I collect this, what are the options and things like that. So it's very interesting to see that there's something like that. I like the way it sounds.
You're going to get to see it though, right?
Yeah, they're going to show it to us.
Yeah,
you want to see it.
I could show you. Yeah, let me just turn on the screen share and let's see. Let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So this is kind of like the main screen. As you can see, it's actually really easy to set it up. We normally run it in the cloud. You can also run it on site as well. But it takes like 5 minutes to set up. It's really quick. This is a test machine that I have. This is kind of the main screen that you'll see.
You're telling me that an open source security tool takes 5 minutes to set up?
Yeah, there's some videos on YouTube if you want to take a look. Yeah, it
takes like 30 seconds.
5 minutes to set it up. Yeah,
that's good.
Really quick.
I joke there because a huge part of my job today is actually installing, configuring, and using open source tools as part of our lab's product reviews. And I can tell you, sometimes it takes more than 5 minutes. I'm just saying.
So one of the things in Velociraptor is we try to reduce the number of dependencies. So there are no dependencies. There's 0 dependencies. So it's basically a binary. You download it from GitHub. And then, we could just go GitHub, Velociraptor, and you just go down here, you grab your binary, and it's not even a package. It is really just the executable for the different platforms. There is an MSI if you wanted. And then you basically just run it. So it doesn't have any, it doesn't really use a database. So it uses files as the backend. So there's no database to set up. There's no, it just works. So you just run it, set it up, and off you go.
Hey, Mike, what's it written in?
It's in Go.
Sweet.
Golang. Yep. So if we have a look, this is the documentation site, and you can have a look at the deployment guide here. And these are the different options for deployment. But your typical deployment is you can actually just run it like this as well if you just want a demo. Just play around with it. That sets up a local instance, but you basically just go through there, and there it is. There's your server, right? So yeah, this is build a Debian package and install it. So it's actually really quick to deploy. Once it's deployed, I have a test machine here, and you'll get this kind of like welcome screen. And if I have a look at this, just shows me all the clients. And you can see that, I've got on this machine, I've got about 200 clients set up just for testing. You see that are just like -1, -2, and so on. Or you look at your recent hosts, that are ones that I've been working with before. So let me just pick this one up. You can actually just get access to the file system directly. So, here I am just kind of browsing the file system. So this is actually looking at the file system from that the server knows. So I can actually just kind of browse the directories. And if I click on this, that refreshes that view. So it goes out to the endpoint and looks at the files. So a lot of people use that as kind of the first sort of familiar interface into Velociraptor, where, I can just kind of like look at, like update and refresh that. Can do like a recursive refresh and so on. Look at all the different files and so on. But I just wanted to show you guys what when I click on the interface here, that just kind of like runs queries in the backend so everything is in VQL in Velociraptor. So I can run queries in the backend to actually look at the host. If I have a look at this is the host overview screen. So it just shows me a little bit about the host. If I click on this, I can quarantine that host. So sometimes when you're doing the FIR, you might get an alert and you just want to investigate this, but you want to make sure that that machine can't contact outside while you're doing this investigation. So we can quarantine the host, and that basically locks it so that it can only talk with the Velociraptor server, so you can still continue on doing your analysis. But the user, can get a message to say, hey, this machine is quarantined because we're looking at it. So this is kind of a nice, easy way to just kind of like time out a machine, right? Up here, I can see it's connected. So Velociraptor doesn't really, so it can fall back into polling mode, but normally it's always connected. That means that that when I issue a command, it just does it. Like it doesn't need, in a lot of other systems, you issue a command and you have to wait for it to pull back and receive it. So it's actually very, very quick. And we can run shell commands like PowerShell, like even dir c. And then, when I launch that, so this is like the interactive shell command, but we prefer generally not to, there's the results, not to use that because we want to have more structured queryings. But let me just show you this side screen here, collected artifacts. So when I was, typing things, interacting with the UI there, what was actually happening is that behind the scenes, Velociraptor was collecting artifacts from the endpoint, and you can see this is what was happening. If you recall, I did a dir command, and it was collecting this system PowerShell artifact. So this is an artifact that allows you to run PowerShell commands, right? So you can get that data. So this is how we actually interact with the endpoint. We can list the directories, we can run a PS list, PowerShell, all this sort of stuff. And these artifacts, this is the artifact. If I click on this, I can see the details of the artifacts. This is a very simple one. This is the VQL that is run. Let me just pick, maybe one of the other ones. Each artifact has VQL. So this goes back to the thing that we talked about before, where you have a really powerful query language, but your user doesn't really need to know that. They just need to select the right artifacts to collect. So for instance, in this case, let's suppose that I wanted to collect scheduled tasks. So I'm just going to click, that plus icon there to create a new collection. Then I'm going to search for the right artifact that collects my scheduled tasks. So I'm going to collect these scheduled tasks. Here I get to see, what is the query in case I want to know, but I don't have to. I have a bit of a description here so I can tell what is this thing going to give me, right? This is going to be useful for me. And I can also control the artifact by having some parameters. So if I go to the next step here, then I can, these artifact parameters control the way the query runs, right? So when you write an artifact, when you are creating one, then you can surface a lot of these parameters for the UI, for the user through the UI to be able to control the way your VQL runs. So, for in this case, this specific case, I have a checkbox here to say, also download the scheduled task files, which are XML files. So Velociraptor will parse them out, tell you what scheduled task is going to run. And if you check this checkbox, it will also give you the original XML files in case you wanted them. And normally we don't, but in case you do. And then in the next step, we can specify resources. And that goes back to the point that we discussed before about like, what are we doing on this endpoint? Are we going to slam it with a lot? And depending on the artifact, like if I want to Yara scan the whole drive, that might take a really long time, and I want to control this a little bit. So you can see these are the limits that are imposed on this particular collection. I can go fast or slow, right? So if I'm doing like a Yara scan, I might want to go slow because it doesn't matter and I don't want to slam the machine. I can specify a time limit for the collection and how much data to actually bring back, in terms of how many rows to bring back and how much to upload, how much data is it going to upload. So these are the defaults, right? So normally I don't touch them and I can review that if I want. But anyway, once I click the launch, it goes off and does it. And it's going to go off to that endpoint. And you can see down here that as it's doing it, the stats are, updating. So it's finished, right? So we've got 196 scheduled tasks that it's collected. And in this case, because we're uploading the scheduled task XML files, it's also uploading them. So we've got some bytes that it grabs. I can export all that stuff. I can prepare a download and then export it as a zip file if I wanted to. But, a lot of the time we don't need to do that. And then over here, we've got, how long it took, 1.8 seconds, when it started. These are just the normal things. Now, because we uploaded the XML files, and we can go also. So you've seen before, we can make a zip file with all of it as a package, or we can just grab one. If we just wanted to get one, we could just grab it straight off the server here. But these are the results that come back, and you can see that because it's a query, then results are a table. So they come back as just a table, like columns and rows. And that the shape of that table, so the columns are described by the query itself. So it's different all the time, right? You can change it. You can in this case, we've got the full path of the task, the command, arguments, and so on, right? And then we have this notebook here. So with Notebook, we can actually interactively investigate, post-process the data using VQL. And I would say that would be like maybe an intermediate to advanced feature. But, you can basically start to, where, commands matches CMD, or something like that, right? Like you can then sort of filter it or, sort it or whatever, so to see like only the interesting stuff, right? So that's basically VQL for post-processing, and you can use that as a notebook to post-process the data and collect things. So, I don't want to get into too much detail here, but just to give you an idea of how this works. Now, the next cool thing about it is that I could, for example, I've noticed just now that when I collect the task, the scheduled task, it doesn't give me the timestamp on the modification time on the XML file currently, right? Because, I don't know, it's just been written not to do that. So this is the power of VQL. Because it's all just queries, and I can go ahead and change things, right? So I can just tweak the current artifact a little bit, so I can see whether you can get a little bit more data to be able to do some interesting stuff. So in this case, for instance, like maybe I wanted to know when the scheduled task was created, but that current artifact doesn't tell me that. Well, that's okay. I can just change it. So I'm going to go to that artifact, and you can see that's the task scheduler artifact. So I'm going to go to this screen here, and this is our artifact, viewing kind of screen, right? Where we can see over here, there's all these artifacts we can search. So I'm going to search for the task scheduler, and this is our current artifact, the one that we ran before. And you can see it doesn't really give us back the time. And this is sort of like an intermediate, feature level, intermediate user kind of thing, where I'm going to take an existing VQL. I might not need to totally understand how this works, but I can change it to just give me extra data, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this.
Whoa, wait, don't be giving away all my secrets now, Mike. How many times have I said, I don't completely understand this, but I think if I just change this one thing, I can make it do what I want.
Right, exactly, right. So in this case, I'm just gonna add the M time, so the modified time, and I'm just gonna just add an extra column to the M time. M time. Just going to add an extra column to the query. And of course, normally you would test it and make sure it's correct and all this sort of stuff, of course. But, it's not that hard. You can eventually you can figure that out and get, used to basically changing the query. So I'm just taking that existing artifact and I'm customizing it. You see it adds the word custom because it's customized. And I can add some data or just tweak it in some way, right? When I save it, then it creates this custom artifact. So now if I go back and I'm like, okay, I want you to collect, my custom version of my task schedule. So like here, that's the custom one. So that's the one with the extra, extra column and time, right? That I just added. And so now if I just launch it, I can just, I showed you all the steps before, but I don't need to, to go through every step. I just, once I'm happy, I can just launch it. So it's really literally a one-click thing. And this time I'm not uploading the tasks, so that, I'm just getting the results. And so now I'm getting an extra, extra time, right? So now I can say, oh, okay, cool. Now I've got the time of modification of this, task. Let's go to the notebook and let's have a look. And maybe we can do a timeline. So I'm just going to make this full screen so I can see it a little bit better. And what I'm going to do here is I want to build a timeline. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is maybe I'm going to reshuffle this table. So I'm going to put the time first. The time goes in the first column. And then the command, so that's the thing that's going to run from the task, right? Command is going to be the second thing, and maybe the arguments. And I'm also going to put in the full path, which is the path of the actual task, the scheduled task, right? So I know what task I'm talking about. Remove the limit. So what this doing is it's running a query over the results that I've collected to sort of post-process them and massage them and put them in a different form. So you can see that I've changed the order of the columns, and I've got the time first, and I've got commands, and now I'll be like, hey, that's really cool. Now I want to do a timeline because I want to see like how are these things related. So I just click this thing on any table. I can add it to a timeline, and so I can see the events from every table like together. So I'm gonna create like tasks, create a new timeline, and I'm gonna call it task. This is it's gonna be a very simple timeline with just one thing in it, but just to give you an idea. So when I add that to the timeline, it creates a new timeline, and now I'm just going to view that timeline, and this is how we are seeing essentially all the events on a timeline. Now, if we had other things in here, like maybe prefetch executions or other things, then they would be together in the same table, and so those events will be intermixed, and I'll be able to see how they relate with time. So so this one basically allows me to basically go through and do essentially a timeline, right? So this is kind of an idea, just to give you a bit of an idea of the kind of processing that we can do on the data. So we can collect the data from the endpoint, and as it's a query, it's just returning back a whole bunch of rows, and then we can post-process them and post-filter them. And you've seen how we can take an existing artifact and we can say, hey, we just need to tweak that a little bit and add another thing. So just to give you an idea, here is our docs. Velociraptor.app, which is our documentation page. And we have this thing called the Artifact Exchange here, which is a community resource for exchanging artifacts. So you can see here, everybody can submit, artifacts that just queries that they think are useful for whatever reason. And essentially, we can search on them here. So you can search for like, have you got something for, there's a lot of Nightmare, Hive Nightmare, Print Nightmare, all of these ones, right? And so you can click on those ones, and it tells you a little bit about it. And this is community contributed content, right? So I can have a look at that and just copy and paste that into the editor, like I showed you before. But actually, let me just get out of the full screen thing. I can just automatically import all of the things from the Artifact Exchange. So like this Print Nightmare, I can just go and run this exchange. So this is a server artifact. So the artifact's actually being collected on the server. And this particular server artifact is, it just basically imports the entire, artifact exchange into Velociraptor. So it just takes like one couple of clicks, and I'm actually able to now see all of these Nightmare, Print Nightmare. These are all from the exchange, right? It just got imported now. So it means that I can, at the tips of my fingerprint, of my fingers, I have access now to all of these community provided content that, anyone, including you, can share on the Artifact Exchange. So you can see these are queries that are, doing some more sophisticated stuff that comes built in. How much time do I have? There's just so many features that we could, really dive in.
All right, one more feature, Mike. One more feature.
Okay, one more. So we can do a thing called a hunt. And a hunt is basically a way of running that analysis over all of our machines. And currently we have 201 machines in this test system. So before, you've seen me collecting the task schedule from one endpoint, and that was cool. But let's say that I wanted to do it from all of my endpoints, right? So I'm going to create this thing called a hunt task scheduler. This is just an example. I can, match by labels and operating systems and things like that, so to be more targeted. But in this case, I'm just going to get it from everywhere. Let me just do my custom one, the one that I just created. So the one with the extra thing. And I can configure it if I needed to, specify resources as before. And now I'm going to launch it. This is called a hunt. So a hunt is when I collect automatically from a large number of machines, right? All at once. So when you create it, it's in the paused state, and we can, kick it off. And you'll see that it will start to schedule these collections on all the endpoints. And then as those endpoints are coming back, you'll see they'll be finished, right? The number increases. And, this number could be 10,000, and it will just go and do it, right? And then you see I don't know how long it took, the time I was talking with you, I've got 200 machines in task schedule. So the scalability here is, I don't really know any other tool that can do that. It's really unprecedented. As soon as I click that go hunt for this, then I do that. So now you can see that I can write my VQL to say, hey, why don't you look for this registry key, or look for this specific thing, or look through the event logs for a specific host name, username, whatever, and then tell me whether you have on that endpoint this indicator, whatever it is. So this is really a way for us to rapidly triage thousands of machines in minutes, right? And it's a really different approach, rather than collecting a whole bunch of data, which is your traditional forensics kind of approach of like, let's grab the MFT, let's grab all this thing. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that analysis on the endpoint itself and just get back that, hit. Did I get a hit? Then I'm going to pivot into that machine and look more closely, right? So I can do that at scale and really quickly. So yeah, that's a really quite a useful feature. So I haven't actually had time to really kind of explain maybe like a third of Velociraptor in this very quick time, because we have lots more things like event detection, real life sysmon integration, all this kind of stuff. So I encourage you guys and viewers to check out our documentation page. And we've just closed the Velociraptor contributor competition, so we'll see what comes out of that. That's really cool. We've had some really cool submissions as well. But take a look at the documentation page, and also we have a training. So the full training course that is on here. I mean, it's quite long, but it has a lot of information in here and a lot of documentation. And also jump on the Discord. There's a link to our Discord, and introduce yourself and say hi or just lurk. We'd love to have you join our community.
Outstanding. Any final questions?
No.
Looks fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it is really fun. The thing that's really exciting for me is because it's such a flexible system, because it's fully controlled by VQL, then I love to sit back and see what people make of it. And some people think of some amazing use cases that I had never thought of, that really kind of push the envelope on what's possible, and open it up to many more use cases. So it's very people are really creative, when they when they get excited by this.
It's awesome stuff. I just have 5 questions left for each of you. It's the same
Okay.
5 questions for each of you, and I'll start with one person, then I'll switch to the other. It sounds really confusing, but there's no right or wrong answer. So, Wes, I'll start with you first. 3 words to describe yourself.
Sorry, put on the spot. I'll say probably perfectionist, quiet, and noodles.
Mike, 3 words to describe yourself. Noodles.
Oh, digital paleontologist. I think that's 2, right? Yeah. So yeah, I'm just having a lot of fun doing this DFIR work and talking with people, and I think it's fun.
Exuberant. Mike, if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
A serial killer. My weapon of choice. Puppies, I think. Let's go with puppies.
Wes, if you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I have to say marshmallows.
Mike, if you had to write, Wes, if you had to write a book about yourself, what would the title be?
This guy is weird.
Mike, if you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
A book about myself.
That's a great title, actually.
Or puppies.
Well, yeah. The digital paleontologist. Let's go with that.
Mike, what is your favorite hacker movie?
Hacker movie. Well, see, a lot of the hacker movies, they don't really have a reflection of real world, right? It's kind of ridiculous a lot of the time. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe War Games, because I'm that old.
Wes, favorite hacker movie?
No. Maybe Sneakers.
Wes, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive,
dead,
dead,
fictional, or otherwise.
Stereo.
Let's see. Loretta Lynn and Gary Busey.
Oh my God.
I like the Gary Busey is a crazy mofo. Have you heard stories about Gary Busey? Someone was talking
I was seeing a lot of
on
stuff.
some podcast about Gary Busey and how like he hangs out in his house in just like his bathrobe and invites like people over and then like shoots his shotgun like off the back deck and shit.
It's like your house on a Tuesday, Paul.
Yeah, pretty much.
Exactly. I was going to say, wait, I think you're confusing Gary Busey with you.
Perhaps.
Did I say the right name?
Mike, choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Oh, why just 2? There's so many.
Well, we are kind of time constrained. I mean, if you want to say 3, I'll allow 3, but 3 max.
Well, we could do the Beatles. That's 4, right?
I'll allow that.
Yep.
Does that include?
So you get like a Paul, Ringo, John,
Yoko Ono,
Chimera, hosted by Yoko Ono.
Yoko Ono, that's the one.
She could be the brood mother,
right?
Of this
She's the nanny.
Heinous beast.
Mike and Wes, thank you so much for appearing on Paul's Security Weekly.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
Make sure you check out Velociraptor. Coming up next, Larry and I and the crew will talk about Nzyme Wi-Fi intrusion detection system. Stick around. Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our list of speakers, which is really long, so brace yourselves. Leslie Carhart, John Strand, Alyssa Miller, Dave Kennedy, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chinavada, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, Justin Kohler, Jay Beal, Trenton Ivy, and Ryan Cobb. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked to register and check out our Rockstar lineup. Of course, I just read the Rockstar lineup, so if there's more, hopefully I didn't miss anyone. Larry, we're talking about Nzyme. Nope. We had Leonard on the show.
Yep.
Did Leonard? He didn't. I don't even think he gave a demo, right? Did he give a demo?
He did a little bit, but he didn't spend a lot of time about doing the setup and that type of stuff. He did a little demo.
Yeah, I think ours is more about like how to get the right hardware and configure it to get it up and running.
Yeah,
it's a little tricky. Some tricks in there.
Yeah. Especially, you look at some of the documentation and maybe some of the steps are out of order. Especially if you're doing it on a Raspberry Pi and you only have one terminal session, it gets a little frustrating.
Right.
So, yeah.
Oh, so there is. Did I put a link to this? No.
I don't know.
Did I? No, I didn't. I need to put a link to this presentation so you can see, so the listeners at home can see this. I didn't do that. I knew I forgot to do something this week, but I will. So this will be available, much like our other technical segments, where there's a link in the show notes that links you to a PDF, either a document or slides, so you can copy and paste our commands so you don't have to recreate them on your own.
Yes.
In typical Paul Security Weekly fashion. So let's dig right into the hardware you need to get up and running, right? Nzyme's open source. Would you call it a wireless intrusion detection system? Is that how we're building it?
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So Larry and I had what I thought were very different setups. It turns out they're pretty much the same, right? I ended up switching to the Panda Wireless PAU09 N600 for $42.99 from Amazon. That one seemed to work pretty well. I had an Alpha card in there, but it wasn't quite the right one. The Panda one works good.
Yep, I originally used a PAU06, but it's only 2.4 gigahertz, so it won't do any of the 5 gigahertz stuff. I tried making it work with a set of drivers for the Alpha AC 1900, and I ended up just sort of falling down on that. Really, you just need a card that can go into monitor mode.
Yep.
But I was having pretty serious issues getting that card to do monitor mode, the AC 1900, stably.
Good to know. Not much has changed with Linux and monitor mode and wireless drivers.
And it wasn't even so much on that. I can get it to work under Linux great. It's putting Linux on an ARM platform is where the problem arises.
Yep, so, that's wonky. A lot of things don't support ARM. A lot of things do too, which is good.
Did any of the Alpha cards work? Any of the older like 36s or any of the I was trying to think of the other one, the ACH one. Yeah, the 36 ACH.
The 51NH.
Yeah.
I specifically didn't try either the 36 or the 51NH. It's been my opinion using those cards just generally because
I was just curious if power actually was able to sustain.
Yeah, at this point, they're so old that there's parts of the newer base of the protocol that they just can't do. Like they can't do high throughput and or anything wider than a 20 megahertz wide channel. So yeah, it's not so great. No.
Larry, now what I think is interesting is that I used the Raspberry Pi 4 8 gig kit for essentially $110. You used did you use a Pi 2 2 gig kit. Is that true?
No, it's the Pi 4
Pi 4
2 gig kit.
Pi 4. There's a mistake in the slides. I'll fix that. Pi 4 2 gig. Now, did you have any memory issues or notice any slowness?
Nope.
Okay. Save your money. Buy the 2 gig kit if you're going to run this. Then.
Well,
yeah.
He just can't remember if he has memory issues.
This is true.
Huh?
This is true. What? Huh? No, I'm glad to hear that because you can save yourself a little bit of money. I think I bought the 8 gig kit just in case I decided to do something else with it. I thought I'd rather just buy the 8 gig one. Larry, I'm sure you have so many Raspberry Pis that at this point it doesn't.
Yeah. It was funny. We were having so I've been teaching 617 this week, and we had a discussion. And they said, "Oh yeah, it's awesome. We've got a Pi," and like I started to lose them. I'm like, I am looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I'm looking at 17 Pis right now, like where I sit. Like,
right. Every time you start a project, you just miss a new Pi.
Yeah, pretty much.
Sometimes I find it's easier to do it that way, and they're not. I mean, there's a gamut of options there, but not overly expensive.
No, not at all.
There's other hardware that's listed as compatible. I think one of the only things is if you're going to buy something new, it might not be in stock. These were in stock and readily available, the ones that Larry and I used.
Yep, and I really enjoy the Vilros kits because they've got some good stuff. The metal cases with the fans and some really good power supplies and extra goodies too. Yeah,
heat sinks, fans, power supplies. The mini, is it mini HDMI? What is it? Mini HDMI to regular HDMI? Is that what it is?
Yep, mini HDMI. Yep.
I really like the metal case though. I much prefer these metal cases over the clear plastic ones.
Yep. The only thing that does kind of stink with the metal cases is that it's not easy to access the GPIO pins if that's something that you want, if you want to access it externally. There is a little teeny gap so you can pass stuff out of the case, but it's not great. But if you don't need to do that, perfect.
Software, Larry and I diverged. I've been trying to standardize, as I've said previously on the show, on Ubuntu. And I'm actually using Ubuntu for Raspberry Pi. It gives you 20.04, and my setup in all the commands that I know and love to what files to edit to set a static IP address and do basic tasks and how it's configured is the same for all of my servers, for all of my workstations, laptops, because I just use Ubuntu 20.04 because I don't know. I guess if you had different use cases, you might use a different, Linux OS. But I get great results from just using Ubuntu, both desktop and server versions, and now the Pi version, because it's all the same stuff. Like the devil you know versus the devil you don't know, essentially, is what it boils down to for me. Larry, you went with something a little more standard.
Yep. Yeah, I use the quote supported operating system from Raspberry Pi Foundation. Raspbios, formerly Raspbian, from just earlier this year, running Buster. So yeah, I've had great luck with it, and just because typically tailored for the Pi, but you could have really done anything.
Yeah, I didn't notice too much different because I think I did a test it out on Raspbios, and it was like the same but different, right? Like some of the commands were different, but essentially it runs the same. Yeah.
Yep. So Paul, on one of them, and it's probably just a matter of installing a package, does Raspberry Pi for Ubuntu come with Raspi config?
I'm not sure. I think it does. Well, I don't know. I take that back. I'm not sure.
Because I know I've used Raspi config, frequently. One of the big ones, I know you had to set static IPs. I could do that with Raspi config. Enabling SPI or I2C for other projects, and super easy to enable SSH if I needed to, just menu driven.
Right.
Like sometimes for me, there's motivation in just clicking a couple buttons and making something work, and I know it's going to work the proper way. As opposed to having to spend 3 hours digging into a config file. So there's something to be said for that.
I want to say OpenSSH was configured already for me in Ubuntu.
Should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Typically.
That's standard in Ubuntu. I don't need the hand holding.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, and it's not on the Pi because a little bit of hand-holding for other users.
Right.
And specifically that it comes with a default username and password of Pi and Raspberry, and you don't want to put that remotely accessible on a network with SSH.
Yep.
So.
So some setup and installation. This is like from my standard playbook on Ubuntu. I set the host name, and I used to edit a file called etc hostname, but now they're all fancy and use the hostname CTL commands.
YAML files, yeah.
And to set a static IP, right, it's YAML files. And in Ubuntu, this was the same format as it is in Ubuntu. So like I've basically now got this committed like mostly to memory. Like I can just go in now and just edit this file, which is nice. I don't have to go look up like the different syntaxes between them. I edited the etc host file as well, and then did the net plan apply to both set a host name and a static IP address on the Raspberry Pi. And like you said, what is it? Rasp config?
Raspy config.
Raspy config.
Raspberry config, yeah.
Raspberry config is how you do all that on the Raspios.
Raspios.
None of this stuff I can say. Raspbian. It used to be. Why did they change the name? Out of curiosity, does anyone know?
I don't know.
So then I did again. I got a mistake in here. It's not upgrade and upgrade. Update and then upgrade is what it should say. And then install the prerequisites, which come from the Nzyme documentation. You get the latest version. You install the latest version, and then you set up your Postgres database. And all of that, I mean, basically those are pulled directly from the documentation. As Larry said, there's some like steps here. So the username and password that you're setting here on this slide, make sure you take a note of that because you're going to need it later. That's your database username and password. Not the same username and password for the web interface. Those are different steps.
And if you lose those, you're screwed.
Yeah. So it's a pretty basic setup, like basically set up most other servers and or install software. Very straightforward. Then I configured the wireless interface next. Larry, do you want to run through? You're more familiar with these commands than I am. I was just hacking my way through it. You run these commands way more than I do.
Also, first IP, right, and then I run the IP command. Modern Linux distributions are removing, the ones that we became familiar with, Paul. ifconfig and iwconfig, in favor of IP and IW. IP to replace ifconfig and IW to replace iwconfig. Shut the wireless interface down with IP link set WLAN 0 down. Puts it in the down state, makes it unavailable for use from the operating system. Set WLAN 0 to monitor mode, and I'm not sure what the none is there.
There was some other parameter that I don't remember what it did, but the right thing is to say none. There was like another option, like set it to monitor mode, and then there was like some other option, which I don't remember what it was, but it is in fact none for that value.
Interesting. All right, and then bring it back up. I mean, I think you can even set monitor mode with it still in the up state, and it will be just fine. Okay, but and then the next command is iwdev, just gets a list of the physical interfaces and their state, and in this case, WLAN 0 is set to type monitor. Hooray! The next one you can get from IW, I think, as well. But IBW list will give you a bunch of stuff for channel information and physical interface stuff. And then Paul did some fancy command line kung fu to just get a comma separated list of the channels that are available for this device, including an extra comma at the end of 106.
Yeah, my command line kung fu is weak in this one, but it works because when you copy it, you just don't include that extra comma. I mean, I could spend time and get that extra comma off the end, right? And,
not worth it.
Yeah, not worth it.
I totally had to bust your stones because, Paul, I would have taken the same approach and I just wouldn't. I'm like, that's good enough.
Good enough. Yeah, it's good enough to get you a comma separated list, which you need to copy and paste in the config file. Yep.
Deleting one comma is less work than it would have taken me to do all of the other stuff.
Right. Yeah. And then in this step, you also need to generate a password hash for the admin interface.
Yes.
And that's right from the documentation as well.
Yes, except in the documentation, they very much have you go in and edit your file to set the password, and then say, "Oh, hey, by the way, you need to create this password by creating a SHA-256 hash from your password."
Right.
No, get the hash first.
Get the hash for. Get the list of supported channels. This is why we structure it this way, right? Put your card in monitor mode. Get a list of supported channels, and then generate the hash. Take note of that. Copy and paste it. Somewhere. That you can destroy later, because one of it's going to be your password hash, and save that information before you go to the next step. And then we get to the lovely configuration file, which isn't that bad. I mean, once you've done it, it's like, oh, it's not that bad. But there's certain things you've got to be aware of, which is why we wanted to do this segment, right? The first being, you set your admin password hash. You should also take note that your username is admin, and this is your password hash that you paste into there. Which now I realize I probably should change my password.
Too late.
This is the danger of doing technical segments with all sanitization.
So Larry, was there not a 3.8 on the Raspberry Pi OS, or?
There was not. There was not. There may have been a way for me to do an apt-get update, apt-get upgrade, or to force 3.8. But 3.7 was already installed, and it does actually work with 3.7. So yeah, close enough.
Okay.
Yeah, the Ubuntu distribution came with 3.8, and the Raspberry Pi operating system, Raspbios, I can never say it. It came with 3.7.
Raspberry OS. Yeah, there we go.
Raspberry OS.
So one thing to note here, Paul, because I just literally had to do it. If you're running these commands on your Raspberry Pi or under Ubuntu, and you're generating the hashes for your password and such, after you're done with that, make sure you clear your command history.
Yep.
Because I was just trying to log into my Nzyme interface, and I haven't logged into it in like 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and I couldn't remember the damn password.
I did the same thing.
But I just went and looked at my shell history, and there it is.
Yep. And make sure you remember which system that you executed that command on, whether it was a Raspberry Pi itself or some other system. I was like, wait, which machine did I execute that command on? Yeah, and then to Larry's point, I'm like, damn, I should have cleared my command history, because there it is right there. Probably not the best way, but
I've been bit by that before. Like, it reminds me of like some Mid-Atlantic CCDC competition with RFID.
I was talking about that the other day. I put it in one of my presentations.
Nice.
Yep.
Oh, is there a role other than leader?
No. Leader.
Oh, I don't remember what the roles are. Oh, he explained it. No. Yes, there is, Lee. You can have other sensors report back up to a leader, right?
Oh, okay.
There's like a whole, because we just talked about OS query, there's a whole fleet of them, right? You can have fleets of these, and they're all collecting Wi-Fi and bringing it back into a central leader.
So we could put all those Raspberry Pis in Larry's office to some good use.
Yes, Larry could ship us all Raspberry Pis. They could collect all kinds of information, and if we sent it over the internet, right, it could all report back up to the leader. Is how Leonard described it.
What could possibly go wrong?
Right.
Cool.
Oh, and this file lives in Etsy, Nzyme, Nzyme.conf is where that file is.
Yeah.
Next, you're going to set up the web interface. And in the cobbler and his children's food, shoes and eating your own dog food, we didn't set up SSL. Too much work.
Yeah.
Bad.
I mean, there was allegedly fairly easy to do, but
sure.
Didn't
do that. So make sure you change that to. It does say set this to an IP address. I did not try setting it to a host name and seeing if that worked. When you,
so
it's
I
interesting.
Go ahead.
I was going to say it's interesting when you set up Security Onion. It's very specific. It's like enter either the IP address or the host name that you're going to access this on, and you will only be able to access it based on the host name or IP address you entered in here. Like we're going to hard code it to what you put in here.
That's the certificate.
So I go in my local DNS server. I set up the the A record in my DNS server. I do the mapping, and then I just find it easier to remember, and it's more descriptive if I set up an actual host name, put it in DNS, and like go through those extra steps to be like, this host has this IP address and it has this host name, and that's what it's going to do, and I can keep it straight in my head because you end up with a lot of systems. So
I'm better with the IPs.
Or
I give it some clever host name. At least I think it's clever, and then it's not really that clever. And later, I can't remember what it was.
I think I called mine. One of them was the Watcher.
And then you're just too clever for your own good, Doug. Like, what did I call that system? I know it was something clever.
And then later, we're all looking at the network, and people are going, "What does Dr. Dong mean?" You're like, I don't know. I
try and pick a theme, but then the problem is you end up with multiple themes.
I used to do that. I had that Sumerian gods, Babylonian gods,
right.
That kind of stuff. The characters from The Hobbit, the usual stuff.
Members.
Yeah, you have those.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they used to do naval ships, and then you have to spell Hatshepsut. Don't ask me how I know this.
Manhattan street names.
We ended up calling John. Well, I called Johnny's new workstation. I don't think I told him yet, but I called it Mjolnir.
Oh,
is that how you pronounce that?
Thor's hammer.
Mjolnir.
Mjolnir.
Yeah,
the hammer.
The hammer of Thor.
Because we hammered it.
Mm-hmm. No, that was a good name for that server. Yep. It's been hammered.
Raptar's hammers, you shall be avenged.
Yep. So, Paul, on this one, I struggled with this one for a little bit because you're right. You talked about you got to put this or this, and it's very specific, and we hard coded it. So I did. Oh well, it's going to be listening on localhost, so it's totally going to be 127.0.0.1.
Oops.
Yeah, and I couldn't access it. I'm like, what? And couldn't get access to any of the interfaces, and it turns out if I'd actually tried to web browse to it from the Pi itself, it probably would have worked. But
or
no, I was accessing from
use SSH in a couple of different configurations to access it, and then you wouldn't need SSL.
True. Port forward SSH and use it as a proxy.
Yeah, you could do that.
No.
Or -X and just forward X, and then fire up a browser off that local system and access it. That works too.
Yeah,
Tyler's shaking his head. Like, no,
and while we're at it, just do Xhost Plus. Totally fine.
That is you have to go through great lengths to turn that on now. Like Linux distributions have made it like next to impossible to be able to do that.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, which is a good thing. Yeah, I think that definitely on purpose.
At least partially because of Tyler.
Yeah. You have to be logged in as that user in order to do the Xhost Plus thing and allow. Yeah. There's a trick to it.
It can still be done, but it's
not advised.
Not like the good old days.
SSH-X is a beautiful thing. All right. So, I mean, we spent a lot of time really talking about how you enter the IP address of how you're going to access it, but that was fun. We're going to move on to the more interesting things like configuring your 802.11 monitors. Even this is not all that interesting or difficult, Larry, right? Like you put the device device name, adapter name from ifconfig or IP space link. Again, as Larry said, I have config. You have to go out of your way to install now.
Yep. The interesting one thing, Paul, that I think that you did was you chose not to turn on predictable names for the wireless adapters.
Yes.
You left it as WLAN 0. I turned on the predictable ones because I could very much see plugging in a different wireless adapter, having it show up as WLAN 0, and totally not working with Nzyme and breaking it. So.
Yeah, and that's true regardless of which Linux OS you're using, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's a good step. And that was an easy config to turn on predictable names, right?
Yeah, it was. It was like create a file that's empty.
Right, right, okay.
Yeah, one of the systemd directories.
I did do that, and I built this a couple of times, Larry, the first time on Raspberry OS, and then I built it again on Ubuntu. And I think when I did it in Ubuntu, I didn't do the predictable names, probably because I looked and it was WLAN 0, and I was like, oh, that's cool, it's WLAN 0. But what you're saying is you still want the predictable names, because I could unplug and plug back in and potentially get WLAN 1 for the same adapter.
Yep, potentially, especially if you plug it into a different port. And
Yep.
As much as I hate predictable network names, I much prefer WLAN 0, WLAN 1, and any of those types of things. It kind of makes sense.
You don't like ENP1 S0?
No.
What happened to ETH0, ETH1? What was wrong with that? We had to go to the
I don't know.
I know I don't like it because it still confuses me. I'm like, why is it not ETH0?
Right.
Yeah. Like now, if it was like, if I wanted to set the status of my wireless adapter to down, I have to remember that the wireless adapter is WLX9CFD5FD1936. Like, no, WLAN 0.
Yeah. Yep.
And
then you
all off the tongue anymore, does it?
Well, no,
it
it
just
doesn't, Lee. It's terrible. So go ahead, Lee.
I was wondering, is there any advantage to playing with the order the channels are in?
Huh.
I'm
Good
assuming
question.
it goes
Yeah,
to the list
because in this step, you're going to paste in your list of supported channels.
right.
Right. So, and I know where Lee is going with this. I think I know where Lee is going with this.
I think you do.
In this case, I don't think so. Because Nzyme is using the system tools to change the channel. So it's kind of slow as it is. Unlike something like Kismet, that is using direct control of the wireless card through the driver, as opposed to using system tools. With Kismet, it can actually make a difference. Because effectively what you're doing when you're doing it through the driver directly is when you're changing channels, you're setting the radio to a channel, and then you're detuning it, and then you're retuning it to the new channel, and then you're detuning it, and then you're tuning it to the channel. When you're doing it through the driver, you can actually do it much faster, to the point that Mike Kershaw, at some point during the development of Kismet, actually sat down with MATLAB to determine how fast, depending on which channel or you did it, could go from the tune to detune between those individual channels.
And here you thought your brain was fried from teaching. Thank you. That was exactly what I was doing.
Well, I kind of had the opportunity to teach that on Mondays.
There you go.
But, yeah.
And also very important to put skip enable monitor mode to true, which means that Nzyme will not try and put your card in monitor mode. It will just assume that you've done that for it.
Yep. Assuming, of course, you did that.
Right. Otherwise, you get errors in the Nzyme log. That says, hey, your card's not in monitor mode. It doesn't actually say that, but that's how you would interpret it. Now, this is the step, Larry.
Oh, God.
Took me quite a hefty amount of time to be able to figure all this out, because there's a few things in here. So you put your channels in there twice? You put your channels in there twice. Per SSID, you put your channels in. So you put your channels in again.
I did not put my channels in again because my access points should only be active on one channel.
Right.
Maybe two if I'm doing 2.4 and 5 gigahertz. Because this becomes important from a detection perspective, because now Nzyme thinks that your access point will be on any channel. So if a new access point shows up with your name on a different channel, it won't alert on it.
Right.
What about channel hopping, though?
What do you mean channel hopping for the access point?
Yeah.
How often does your access point channel hop?
Yeah. So I was confused. This is wrong. Well, this says for your SSID though. So you want per SSID, where are all of your access points with respect to their channels? So if I've got a 2.4 gigahertz network and I've got 3 access points, one of them is on channel 1, one's on channel 6, and one's on channel 11.
Yep. Now the question is, are they all on the same SSID? Are they all on the same friendly name? And
Right.
if they are,
in my
you
case at
definitely
home,
want to.
they are, right? But Tyler in Ubiquity, can it auto-select? It can auto-select the channel. Actually, a lot of them
Yes.
auto-select the channel.
And it does based on network density.
Mm-hmm.
So it does that real time based on client load, network density, and neighbors.
Yeah, so maybe that's why I put that in here and just said like all my access points for this SSID could be on any of these channels.
Yep. See, I mean that works, but my Ubiquity doesn't do automatic channel selection for me.
You can turn that off. Yeah, you can turn that off.
Yeah, you
Yep.
can turn that off. I know Aruba does the same thing, as does Meraki.
Yeah. You list the security protocol that you're implementing, and the beacon rate is something you'll have to adjust. And
Yeah, I didn't have to adjust mine.
in a previous installation, I did. Like, it kept telling me that my access points were exceeding the beacon rate, and I had to change it. And this may have changed between different versions of Nzyme. I want to say originally it was 30 was the default, and I think probably what happened is a bunch of people opened up tickets with Leonard, and they were like, hey, I keep having all these beacon rate issues, so he changed the default beacon rate to 40, and I still get beacon rate issues. So I would actually, if you've got Ubiquity access points, I would recommend changing that to like 45 maybe. Might be a safer value, because I looked at my logs today and I was still getting some beacon. Explain why it's monitoring beacon rates, Larry. Do you know why?
I honestly don't know, and I'm not sure what that. I never figured out what that measurement was.
Larry, do you have a boom? Do you have a boom mic? Did you move your boom mic?
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, sorry, I got
That's
pushed out of the way. The little one came in saying good night for bedtime. So, while you were talking, I'm not exactly sure what the beacon rate was supposed to be measuring here. I set mine at 40, and I haven't had any beacon issues with any of it. And I have Ubiquity stuff, so I'm not exactly sure what it's supposed to be measuring.
Isn't that the query time for identifying each beacon across each channel for that SSID?
I'm not sure what that means.
But that could be why, because Paul has a lot more channels than Larry does, and that may be why the beaconing is overloading, because it's
Even here at work, I have 3 access points, and they're all providing the same SSID, and they're all 2.4 and 5 gigahertz.
Mm-hmm. So you have more reporting going on than Larry does, which is why his is not giving you that error, I think.
Isn't it how often it's polling for the beacons that are being distributed by the SSID from that particular access point on that channel?
That's what I think it is, but I'm just guessing.
Yeah, I'd be guessing too. I honestly don't know.
The documentation rate, even in the comments in the file, says you may have to adjust this. Also, when you first fire this up, Nzyme is not going to know what your BSSIDs are for all of your access points, what their addresses are, and also what their fingerprints are. So it actually fingerprints like this access point at this address or BSSID is associated with this SSID and on this particular frequency and set of channels, and then determines. I think that's how he's calculating the fingerprint.
I think there's something else in the fingerprint too, based on some header information in the beacons too, if I remember correctly.
Right, and he'll list that in the web interface for you. So what you have to do when you first fire this up is see all the alerts that you're getting and saying, "Hey, I found a rogue access point." You're like, "No, that's one of mine." Go get the fingerprint. Make sure the fingerprints align with the BSSID, and each. What we figured out was that we had 2 fingerprints, because like I set all the fingerprints and I was still seeing alerts. Each of those fingerprints are associated with the frequency. So I've got one at 2.4, one in the 5 gigahertz spectrum. Therefore, there's 2 fingerprints per BSSID. And so you only see 1 block there. I have 3 of these blocks for each of my access points.
Yep. And for the record, Paul, when we're throwing around some terms here, because I got to teach that this week too, the SSID, the BSSID, and the ESSID. So the beta SSID and the echo SSID for those using the NATO alphabet. The SSID is the friendly name.
Mm-hmm.
The basic service set identifier, the BSSID, is the MAC address associated with the transmitter in the radio of the specific access point.
The radio transmitter. Yep.
The extended service set identifier is the MAC address associated with the SSID, the collection of access points for, in my case, like Hex of the Matrix Unify.
Yeah.
So it's a collective for the network. Hey, I want to join this network. The MAC address for this network is, and I've got 4 access points.
Right.
But I'm close to the one in the office, so I need to send it to that MAC address because of that specific radio hardware, because of my proximity and the signal strength.
Mm.
Is that some kind of a virtual interface that is stood up by the driver?
I'm not exactly. There's a method for calculating that, and it's typically if you're adding multiple access points to it. I want to say it is derived from the other ones, from the first one.
Okay.
But I don't know that it is a virtual interface. There's actually when you look at your access point, there won't be an interface for your ESSID. It becomes strictly about some of the addressing in the air.
Okay, that makes sense. So for some of the layer 2 stuff that's happening.
Yeah, for layer 2. Yep.
And
Awesome.
just pay attention to your syntax too when you're constructing this together. Like if you're a Python person, it's like a list of dictionaries, and inside of that dictionary, there's a list or a set. I'm not sure which one that is.
The first time I set this up, Paul, I got so frustrated with this that I ended up giving up because the documentation really wasn't clear. Specifically like great BSSIDs. So then I'd have for every network I had a separate BSSID section, and that didn't work. And then like, can you put an address and then a fingerprint, or multiple addresses and fingerprints? And no, you couldn't. Right. So they each had to be their own very independent structured blocks under the BSSIDs list.
Correct.
So there weren't examples you could grab.
There were not examples that I could find.
From our setup,
for folks running the same BSSID, the same SSID on multiple BSSIDs with different MAC addresses. Yeah, there was no examples that I could find of that.
Sweet. So once you figure that out, again, there's an example here, and I'll share these slides out in PDF format for everyone, so you can see and copy and paste and all that stuff. Just make sure you tune all these values, right? All of your values are going to be different. Your BSSIDs, your fingerprints, your SSID, your channels, your security, your beacon rate are all things that you likely have to configure. In some cases, you will have to configure. In some cases, you may have to tune it, like the beacon rate.
My suggestion, Paul, before we publish these slides, is that we update this one to show that a sample here with the BSSIDs with multiple addresses and multiple fingerprints.
Yeah, now that you say that, Larry, I think that'd be good for people to see. Yeah.
Yeah, because it doesn't exist elsewhere that I could find.
I think I know why you had to change the beacon rate for yours too, Paul. Based on AirWatch and client handoff for Ubiquity, that beacon rate has to be higher because of the way they do that.
Interesting.
Okay.
My title on this slide is wrong. Sorry, that was copied and pasted from a previous segment. But I did want to show, and so we'll publish an updated version of this slide deck. But the screenshot is correct. So when you go in and you look at your networks, you can see that you can see your beacon rates there. You can see your BSSID, your SSID, and your network-wide fingerprints. And if you drill down on other screens, you can also see your individual fingerprints as well that are associated with those BSSIDs. So all of that, like you're basically looking at this screen and then going back and updating the values in your configuration file. And then you can also see your networks as well, and all of the adjacent networks. So you can see everything here. I didn't want to actually publish that full list. But once you get it up and running, you can go to the networks tab. You can see all of the networks, the advertised networks, the manufacturer, the security of it all. a very kind of Kismet style like list, although this is not Kismet, obviously, right? But you get a kind of Kismet style list of all the adjacent networks, as it were. Bless you.
Oh, excuse me. Thank you. Whew.
Bless you.
Yep.
Yeah.
This is clearly also not creating system D services.
Yeah, the title on this one's wrong too.
I didn't even catch that last night when we were reviewing these.
It was late last night when you were reviewing it.
It was.
It
was
day.
after teaching all
It's a
day
long
and
day.
then studying slides for the first run of Sec 556 next week. So
You were looking at the content, not the title.
Yes.
yes,
That's he was
bingo.
like, yeah, we're like, yep, content's good. And we didn't
Been
look at
there,
the
done that.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep, because who
This
reads
is
the
cool.
titles anyways?
Yeah.
Now, so my question for you, Paul, it took me a little bit to narrow down some of my alerts.
Yeah, I can I can actually show you some of the alerts. So this is actually my running system.
Nice.
This is the system. It's actually not running right now. We were doing some work over by the bench, which is probably good that it's not running now because it won't show you all the latest and greatest information from our wireless networks because it's hard to sanitize a live screen, right? So this will give you some of the historical data. So the status now is it's down, and my guess is the Wi-Fi adapter got knocked over and disconnected, or I need to re-enable monitor mode on it or something like that. So something happened in the system. But you'll see similar screens when you do that in metrics for what you're monitoring. If you go to alerts, see, I've got a bunch of these bandit contacts.
Yeah,
And
that's
a bandit
interesting.
is essentially like a rogue access point. Is that?
Yep, or an attack device. Yeah, it'd be interesting to
Right.
see what you've got for individual. Is it the Space Hoon Wi-Fi
Yeah.
deauthor?
Yeah. What is that? That's I can guess what that is based on the name, right? It's a deauthor.
Yep, and it's a small device based on an ESP8266 chipset or a Node MCU. No, I'm sorry. Yeah, is it? Is that
Larry's
the one?
watch.
Yeah,
Right.
pretty much. Pretty much. The interesting one that I found for that was that I got one of these error messages about a week ago for an ESP8266 deauthor, and I'm like, who went in my drawer and powered one of these on?
Yeah, I was like, wait, is Larry here? I went out in the office. I'm like, Larry, are you here? Cool. Are you gonna hang out here and work? You should do that more often, Larry. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
But
So
you
yeah,
worked. So I
ended up-
I don't know what where these came from. If it's a false positive or not.
Yeah, so I ended up with some unexpected BSSID beacons and some fingerprint beacons, and those were getting all the fingerprints squared away for the access points and so forth.
Yeah, I had a lot of beacon rate anomalies still.
Yep, and unexpected channel beacons. I don't remember where that came from, but it was
Yep.
one of those that I had missed a piece of hardware and only had it half done type of thing. The one that I'm looking at now is it says multiple signal tracks.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which
I don't know if I have one of those as a.
Yeah, which is this could indicate an attacker is spoofing the station, causing a different signal strength than the legitimate station. Or if there's some sort of Wi-Fi interference, your signal strength could actually change, which I think is what was happening
Right.
in my case.
Now, so you can. I'm sorry. You can see that a month ago I have unexpected SSID beacons, and that's because I was configuring it, right? I hadn't told it that this was traffic actually associated with a network that I own.
I'm curious if any of the air marshaling or air watch or any of those things do something interesting to kind of watch for that stuff.
Well,
Be
it would show up in
surprised.
as an alert here. Like if I was adjacent to an Aruba or what was the other one you mentioned? Meraki.
There's AirWatch, Meraki.
AirWatch.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Cisco does it.
If they were doing something to protect their networks and I was in proximity in Wi-Fi in range of those frequencies, I would actually see that, I would imagine, in Nzyme.
Yep. Yep.
You
Like,
should.
one of them doing IPS, intrusion prevention techniques
Right.
to prevent clients from connecting to.
See, that
rogue
also makes
access
me
points.
wonder if any of the things like the Amazon Ring or any of the Alexa devices where they're starting to do client isolation and stand up SSIDs for neighborhood SSID and wireless sharing crap. I wonder if any of that does anything weird.
You'd think that would get flagged because a lot of those devices go up with their own SSIDs when they're activated. So I'll bet you these things would flag all those as rogue network points unless you specifically put them in there. I would almost guarantee you'd see that stuff light up.
I'd like to know, like, honestly.
I mean, I would want it to light up because if somebody was setting up Ring doorbells in their office, I would want to know, or cameras or whatever.
It's interesting. Like my monitoring went away at around 1:00. My intern didn't get here till much later, so I can't. I mean, I could still blame him, but but 1:00 is when we started giving Johnny his new computer, and we were on that bench like messing with stuff. So like right before the show I was looking at this, I'm like, oh wait, it's down. I'm like, oh, that makes for good talking points. Like I think I knocked something offline. Like obviously the Pi itself is running, its network adapter is connected, so if someone didn't remove the Ethernet cable, which is what happened earlier in the week, someone had ripped the network cable out of the Pi to plug to something else because it's sitting on our bench where we belch and build computers and do projects. It's
it's in the project space. It's in the
project space. It's in the lab. So like random stuff happens in that area.
Yep.
Right.
And that's
things get taken out. RAM gets MSATA devices get out. Hammers come out. Like that kind of stuff on that bench. So.
And that's kind of interesting, Paul, because when I configured mine, I used the internal Raspberry Pi wireless adapter just to connect it to my network, so I didn't have to worry about a cable, and it works great.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. I mean, because that means you can put it in a spot, Larry, that just needs power, and there's lots of creative ways to power a Raspberry Pi, and you don't need to run a network cable to it.
Right.
Yeah.
As long as I can reach your Wi-Fi network or a Wi-Fi network. That works.
And I will say, I am extremely impressed with Nzyme and its ability to run really well on a Raspberry Pi. Like I haven't noticed any like lagginess or like high CPU or power drain on the, I don't get messages in Linux that say that, I'm straining on power or anything like that if you're not using a wall work kind of thing, right?
Now, is this the only app you're running on that Pi, I'm assuming? Someone asked if you could run something like Pi-hole on it in conjunction.
I would say yes.
Yeah, I mean, you might want the one with more RAM. I would recommend if you're going to do that. But yeah, again, kind of super impressed just how lean this is running.
You're looking at mine, Paul. I'm SSH to mine right now, and it's doing its thing. And running top, the load average is 0.32, 0.30, 0.36.
So it's very lean.
It's barely touching the CPU. It's like 2 to 0.6% use.
It's pretty amazing how much compute power is in these little Pis.
Especially the 4s.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's interesting, Paul. I think that for me, I think that Nzyme still struggles a little bit with some of these networks that it's finding. So if you could look at your network tab and take a look and see if there's anything unusual there.
Oh yeah, because it's not.
Oh, it's down.
It's not.
Down. Yep.
Yeah, running right now.
Yep. So I've got some that there's like some Fire TV devices, which are interesting. Because it has some not human readable content in it, in the SSIDs. So I don't know what the deal is with that. Also, if I remember correctly, I have a WPA3 enabled network because it's called Hacker the Matrix WPA3, and I could have sworn I had it enabled for WPA3 for some testing, but it's being discovered as WPA2. And I know Leonard was having some discussions about making sure WPA3 was identified properly. It may also be in like backwards compatibility mode, so that would be legitimate that that's the case. But I've got one network that shows up around my house, and I think I know what it is. Back in the day when they came and installed a Verizon Fios, they dropped off this piece of shit Action Tech wireless router, and they all came enabled by default with WEP. Yeah, WEP. And this wasn't all that long ago. And I need to have this thing on my network because it's the part that bridges between Ethernet to the cable TV network for Mocha, so that all my set-top boxes can get program and guide information, so it knows what to record when. So the first thing I did was went in and turned, I want to say I turned the Wi-Fi off completely, and also disabled WEP and put something else on it. But this network still shows up billing as an Action Tech router, and currently it says it has no encryption. Yet if I try to connect to it, it tells me that it needs like a WEP key or a WPA2 key and won't actually connect as an open wireless network.
Is that your neighbor's device, or do you think that's your device?
I think it's mine. I really do.
Think it really doesn't disable the wireless when you disable wireless in that firmware, and the firmware's kind of wonky? Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, considering that thing has been running and only doing that quote Mocha pass through pretty much since the day we installed it, and we've been in this house 7 years. The device is 7+ years old.
It's why I just converted everything to YouTube TV.
Yeah, probably a smart idea.
So some troubleshooting, Larry. Var log Nzyme, Nzyme.log is where you want to go. Now this log, Larry, from what I can tell, is information about the Nzyme running service itself and does not contain any of the Wi-Fi analytics and or logging.
Correct. Yeah, it's all about the service itself and the connectivity to the wireless adapter. Excuse me, and so forth. So like systemd log output type of stuff.
Right. And so you had some. So what I gleaned from this log, and you gleaned something different, right? I saw messages like if your card's not in monitor mode, it'll complain very loudly about that and give you messages, and you'll read it and go, "Oh, my card's not in monitor mode, so I need to go flip that back into monitor mode." You actually got some different messages as well.
Yeah, I did. And part of the reason why I started looking here is because all of a sudden I'd get some data in Nzyme, and it would run between 15 and 30 minutes. And then it would say, nope, no wireless adapter connected. And I could clearly see that there was a wireless adapter connected, but it couldn't use it. And it was in monitor mode. And it was bad. Because like I'd get 15 to 30 minutes worth of data, and I'd unplug the card and plug it back in, and all would be working again for 15 to 30 minutes. But turns out what I was getting in the Nzyme log was this error message that we've got on the screen here about the RT2X00 USB vendor request. Vendor request 07 failed for offset blah, blah, blah with error -110. And I couldn't figure anything out what the hell was going on. But to me, what this made sense for was remembering back in the day when we used to use the AWS 051NH wireless adapters that were very, very power hungry. You'd plug that into your system and it wouldn't get enough power, and you'd do something on Wi-Fi, and next thing you know, you had a kernel panic because there wasn't enough power to do the operation. It would just send garbage back to the driver and to the kernel and crash your system. Turns out it was in fact related to power. Because I had my wireless adapter plugged into one of my USB 3 ports on my Raspberry Pi version 4. And I remembered back that when I first started using the 4, I had plugged a keyboard into the USB 3 port, and it just didn't work. Like I couldn't type on the system, and you name it. So I plugged the keyboard into USB 2 port, and all of a sudden it started working. So I started Googling why keyboards don't work on USB 3. And turns out there's still some issues with the true USB 3 capability and compatibility on the Raspberry Pi version 4, some related to power. And sure enough, I unplugged my wireless adapter from the USB 3 port, plugged it into a 2, and it's been up ever since.
It's amazing. A quick story on that note. So, we're talking about a very small computing device with the Raspberry Pi. This problem can extrapolate out to your really expensive MacBook Pro, your Windows computer, or your Linux computer. My computer is a build that I did that has like 256 gigs of RAM and a Threadripper AMD processor on it. And I was having similar issues with USB. And the issues can be a combination of both power and USB bus speed. And similar to your story, Larry, right? And when you're doing these kind of projects, making sure that you've got the right USB devices plugged into the right ports that correspond with the right bus that have the right power requirements. I had to put my HDMI capture device, my which connects to my camera, my USB DAC, and I have multiple ones, my keyboards, my speakerphone. And so what I did was I did LS-USB, and I saw like these devices are plugged into bus 1, and I have bus 1 all the way through 9. And like I created a file that was like, this bus corresponds to these physical ports on my system. And I make sure that I basically manually load balance my bus in power. And so if I've got a hub, I make sure it's powered. And there's differences in the hubs and how they power. Oh, I can't remember now, but I got like really deep into, whether the hub shares a bus or has multiple buses or power. There was some moniker for the hub. It was like a type X versus a type Y kind of hub, and how it distributed power. And I wish I could remember what that was, but I kind of got really deep into USB troubleshooting, because what would happen is my computer would boot up, and some days like I'd be fine using Teams and using my headset and my camera, and then like later in the day it would just stop working, and it was totally friggin' random. And that was one of the issues that I had. Once I balanced power and bus speed, things were 90% better. Then it was left up to the application, and how the application, like Microsoft Teams on Linux, is a flaming turd. And if that started up first, it would like try and use the USB bus, and through some like weird driver thing in the application, it would bork all my audio devices. So what I did was I told Linux, don't start up Teams when you start the system, and everything would boot up just fine. And now actually I can start up Teams, the client, and be better. Even though it's a flaming turd, it's still better. But I end up, using a browser to do my Teams calls. I can use Zoom, I can use Skype, I can use all these applications. And in Linux, it actually is working really well with my camera and all my audio devices. But that's very similar. If you're doing this stuff with Wi-Fi cards and USB, your exercise that I went through is going to be pretty similar.
Yeah, and similar type of thing. Corinne, our oldest daughter, comes downstairs to me the other day and says, "Daddy, that totally awesome custom keyboard we built together. Because I got on a roll last year. Like none of the lights are working. Like it doesn't make my awesome rainbow stuff.
My
like,
keyboard's doing the other thing too.
It doesn't do the rainbow stuff anymore. And like I have my instruction manual, and I tried to set it and it doesn't do anything. So I went upstairs and looked, and I'm like, what did you change? She says, I plugged in my USB mouse to charge it over there. And I unplugged the mouse, and the lights start working again. I'm like, let's rearrange these things for some better power distribution.
I did that too. That was because it's a drop control, and with the lights on it and everything, and it's USB-C. And I needed to plug something else in USB-C, so I ran my keyboard from USB-C to USB-A is the standard one, right?
USB-A is the one that you have to flip over 3 times to get it in, right?
Yeah, so I did the USB-C to USB-A and plugged it into a hub, and my keyboard worked, but the lights weren't working. It wanted to be connected via and what I found was on the motherboards, one of the USB buses that's associated with Type-C, it's like a USB 3.2 Gen 1 or Gen 2 will typically be the ports that has a Type A port and a Type C port, and those are on their own bus. Those 2 ports is what I found. Pretty standard on Asus. Both Asus motherboards I was working with were pretty standard about that. So
Yep. But yeah, I feel your pain, and I also feel your pain with keyboards from Drop and others. It's kind of hard to see in the dark right now, but right over my right shoulder here, there's a bunch of, some darkness and some black, because that's 4 keyboards from Drop in addition to the 2 that are already on my desk. Oops. I have a problem.
But folks have those issues with a lot of different hardware and software, Mac OS and Windows alike. So like those USB problems just don't seem to want to go away. So
yeah, USB power is a train wreck, and I get why it is a train wreck, and it's for some of the same reasons why in the Sans Wireless course we include a powered USB hub, because you think about the USB 2 standard, which we were often dealing with. There, in the olden days, Paul, when we were using those cards, like you could plug it in, it would be just fine, and it would suck all the power it needed, because no one cared that the USB spec said 500 milliamps per port and 1,000 milliamps per bus, and the wireless adapter would suck 1,500 milliamps from one port, and like it didn't care. But then what started happening is that you start doing that and your battery life goes to shit in your laptop. And everybody starts complaining to the manufacturers, you promised me 6 hours and I got 1. So they said, well, fuck all y'all. We're going to make these USB ports conform to the spec because that's what's killing it. And broke all sorts of shit.
Yep.
We're going to follow the rules so we don't get sued. For other reasons.
There's a couple of references. The installation documentation from Nzyme is pretty good, as well as I link to setting a static IP address on Raspberry Pi. Of course, you can Raspberry Pi config and or edit the files behind that, and that's going to differ depending on which Linux distribution that you're using. That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah.
Good discussion. With that, we'll take a short break, come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned. Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. If you want to stay in the loop, all things Security Weekly, please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. You can subscribe to our podcast via your favorite podcast catcher. Check us out on Spotify. Sign up for our YouTube channel. Subscribe to our mailing list. Join our Discord server where you can chat with us, troll us, or all of the above. And follow us. We also live stream to Twitch as well. You can get to all that stuff at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, if you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical training, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com on demand. We do have a webcast coming up. You should be able to register for that very soon. It is with Keeper Security. Keeper is a competitor to LastPass and 1Password. They also are making some announcements that will allow you to manage all of your secrets. So very, very cool company, very awesome and very smart people that work there. I've gotten the privilege to work with some of them and chat with them, and they're like really, really smart. So I'm impressed. We got a webcast coming up with them in next month in October. So stay tuned for that. Joffrey, Larry, are you guys teaching? You're teaching now, Larry. Like, well,
yeah,
not right
I am.
now, but
I'm teaching this week. Next week is our first beta run of the new IoT class, the 3-day IoT class, Sec 556. I've got another run of that the month following. I think I'm scheduled currently to be in a hybrid, both live and online, for Hackfest around Thanksgiving. I think I've got another live online in December for 617, and starting to populate for next year. And the one that I'm currently looking at, which I'm kind of terrified about actually, is an in-person event in Paris for 617.
Oh my!
Sounds fun.
Oui.
Okay. Yeah, we will see how that goes.
Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us. Joff, welcome.
Hey, it's good to be here. I got a new camera. It supposedly makes me look better.
If that was at all possible, Joff, I don't know if that's possible.
Yeah.
It's a thing. Anyway, in terms of teaching, I just did teach this week, which was actually fun. Wild West Hackenfest is going on this week, for those that don't know. And unfortunately, it is virtually only. It was going to be physical, but this Delta thing got in the way, and we decided to make it virtual. But no worries. Upcoming, just like Larry, I am teaching November 16th. Tuesday, November 16th is the beginning of my next Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development class, which is mostly focused on malware development and learning about, C2 in that context, and a lot of shellcode delivery mechanisms and some Python and some Golang and some C# and just all kinds of good stuff, right?
And I will say, not having taken the course yet, but from a secondhand party, it's an amazing course.
Oh, thanks, Larry.
I have three reviews. I have 3 reviews of Joff's course, and all 3 were pretty much saying it blew my mind. I mean, literally. I mean, in a good way. So all 3 of those were like, wow. And although one person said, I felt so inadequate.
Oh my goodness!
And I said, that means it's working.
Yeah, I'm not here just to scare the dickens out of people, but I've definitely enjoyed putting this together, and we've got a lot of good reviews, like you've said, and yes, we did have some In Guardians representation this week, and apparently it was enjoyed. So that's really good. So yeah, if you're interested in the course, November 16th is the next run, and we are running the usual suite of things, which is talking about an open C2 RAT framework, talking about a C#.NET implants, living off the land, Python code, shellcode execution, all kinds of good stuff. So.
It's a great segue into one of our stories and I'm not sure if you cover this in the class or not. If you don't, you might want to consider it, is malware is attacking Windows machines through the Windows subsystem for Linux. The article says for the first time.
Yeah.
I mean, we've been covering this crap for a long time. If the press comes out and says, "Oh, this is the first time we've seen this attack technique," likely not the first time, because the first person to develop it and see it isn't reporting it to the press, most likely. But it says while this approach was not particularly sophisticated, it says the novelty of using an ELF loader designed for WSL gave the technique a detection rate of 0 in virus total. Which that's just kind of weird. In any case, basically you make an ELF binary, and I linked, if you really want to go read some really nerdy stuff, you can read about the ELF binary format. It's very, very nerdy reading. It's essentially a binary file format for Linux and Unix systems, but Windows supports it through WSL. Folks are using it to package malware and or C2 implants, Joff, to your point. And it also says, what I thought was interesting, most endpoint agents designed for Windows don't ship with signatures to analyze ELF files, which is why it's becoming a popular attack vector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what? That's such a great story. So it turns out that Windows in the Windows 10 incarnation with WSL2 certainly has increased the attack surface, right? But when you go further, you start looking at Windows 11, and they're introducing, even more attack surface with the UWP apps that are coming forward from Windows 10, plus potentially mobile platforms being supported. I mean, the attack surface is growing larger, and it's kind of weird, right? Because frankly, in the traditional Windows space, if you look at the PowerShell, the Visual Basic, the DLL, the XE, the all the traditional stuff you're used to, Microsoft had locked it down pretty well, right? I mean, had gotten there, and then all of a sudden, new features, and it's exploding out into new attack surface. It's kind of crazy when you think about it.
Also, I think it's interesting as we look at the other features in WSL and newer versions, they're going to support a graphical interface on Linux. And I'm not quite sure how they're doing that. I know I read articles that they were going to do that. They do it already with WSL2. And is it X? Or is X and Wayland the same thing, or is Wayland like the new X, or does Wayland build on X? I don't remember. I did some research a while ago on this, because Wayland's like the new window manager, and I don't remember if it builds on some of the X stuff, or if it was like Windows. Maybe it is Windows X or Windows FX. I know it's using KDE Plasma, at least for the Kali.
I think it was
in WSL2. Yeah. What Wayland is like the subsystem on Linux systems, and I'm not sure what Windows adopted. They'd have to adopt some kind of X or X-like system to
something
render
under there. Yeah, so something's
that.
Actually pushing those windows out to that Wayland system. So it's probably X. Could be something else, but
I mean, well, if you go back to the original Windows architecture, right, it's always been a layered approach with I mean, if you really go back in the Wayback Machine, remember that the Win32 API was just one subsystem amongst a number of them, right? Remember OS2? Remember the idea of supporting POSIX? I mean, they had a layered DLL system in the design from the very start, right? So for them to layer on X Windows support with WSL2, I mean, the architecture is kind of built for it, right?
I'm sorry. So X server, X or X11, and Wayland are different implement different protocols, windowing systems for Linux systems. So yeah, I was correct. Wayland is
it is different than X,
it's what's built into some of the more modern distributions.
It's an abstraction layer,
right?
Okay.
Then the desktop environment, GNOME, KDE, and others uses that underneath.
Yeah,
right. That's how it works.
It's abstraction layer.
Yep.
Yeah,
and I'm not sure what WSL how it is implementing both the display server as well as the desktop environment, right? Which are the two different components.
Yeah.
While we're on the subject, we might as well we could cover this all in one fell swoop. So
just do it all.
Yeah, I had an article. Adrian's always teased me about the year of the Linux desktop, which I hate that we came up with this moniker of this is going to be the year of the Linux desktop. This article and this author, and I applaud the author's efforts. Who was the author of this article? PC Magazine, Sasha Sagan wrote an article, and it's 2021 is the year of the Linux desktop. And it's no, really. And basically, his whole pitch is all of the grade school, basically school systems and universities and colleges are issuing Chromebooks that are using G Suite on top of that. And Chrome OS is based on Linux. And I'm okay, technically, you're correct, right?
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong. He's not wrong. He's got something there. I don't think that means that this is the year of the Linux desktop because Chrome OS is based on Linux and schools use it. I mean, that's still a little bit of a stretch because you're still using a very limited kind of computing device.
I was going to say, do you remember historically the concept of thin client? Mm-hmm. Because what it really is the year of the thin client.
It's the year of the cloud computing devices. Really, what it just happens to be built on Linux.
Thin client, yeah.
It's the year of the Linux-based client.
The BSD, right? Like Mac OS and BSD are variants of some sort. So
there's a lineage. There is a direct lineage, although I would imagine that lineage has just become more and more kind of spread apart, right? In the early days, it was very much more closely tied to BSD. I think they've written probably, my guess would be a lot more code specific to their hardware platforms that necessarily isn't based on BSD or open source. But
but Paul, now if you compound that with, just because it's school and folks, that there are still a number of folks for their personal stuff have a Chromebook.
Sure.
I literally have two Chromebooks sitting right there. And if you count macOS base as BSD, there's Linux on the desktop. You may even be able to tangentially get WSL as Linux on the desktop.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
it's Linux on the desktop, but usable, and you just don't know it.
All of your points are extremely valid, Larry. I think where the flaw is in this whole notion that there's going to be a year of the Linux desktop, right? I think that's really the thing that kind of falls down for me. Is why are we trying to force this into? There has to be a year when the Linux desktop takes over. And Larry, again, I love your points because it kind of backs up the true notion that Linux is making these kind of slow strides into these various technologies and in various computing platforms that maybe it's not the focal point of how people are using computing and software today, but it's slowly making it into mainstream software and software operating systems and applications.
Yeah.
So
I think that's a fair statement.
What's interesting is, and a really big pet peeve of mine, because I've used Linux, Ubuntu, and very similar distributions, now straight Ubuntu, for all of my laptops and desktops for a few years now, right? And I'm just saying that to toot my own horn or whatever, but that's just what I've chosen to use, right? And it irks me, being someone that uses that type of technology, to say that Linux is going to be the year of the desktop when someone creates a distribution like Windows FX that looks like Windows. I'm we don't need Linux to look like Windows, or really Mac OS for that matter. And we're not seeing Linux, true Linux on the desktop, for a lot of reasons. And when I think about that, the look and feel is like way down on the list, at least for me. And I think a lot of people, the look and feel, like whether you create a distro that you make it look like Windows or Mac OS or whatever it is, and there's been lots of iterations of that, that doesn't matter. I think we'll truly see actual like full-blown Linux distributions on the desktop when a number of factors are met. And I spent some time thinking about this. I think when Apple pisses off more of its customer base, people might move to Linux. When Microsoft moves all your apps into the cloud and confuses you and pisses you off, you might move to a Linux platform. I think also the Linux kernel driver developers have to work more closely with the hardware manufacturers and vice versa to make that a much cleaner system today, and not 100% of devices, but they got to get to like 80% of devices where there's a close collaboration.
Oh God, that is such a true statement.
Right, drivers are a thing that they hold you back. Yeah. And also, I think that where was I going with this? I had another point. So the applications are probably one of the biggest things. And Linus Torvalds himself actually called this out and said the real downfall and why Linux hasn't made more inroads on the desktop is because it's too difficult to create an application for Linux that works on all the distributions. And I think when we have an app framework, a way to create and deploy an app, like MSI is for Windows, right? When we have that for Linux, I mean, Snap is just one of the things, but a lot of distributions have their own kind of app store. But when we have a cross-distribution way of distributing applications to Linux distributions, when all those things hold true, I think we'll see Linux take a huge kind of market share in the desktop. Now, Job, you made a switch in your desktop computing environment.
I did actually. I literally I've been using a MacBook for a long time, and I've had enough. I am an example of somebody that has been pushed over the edge by Apple's poor choices. And there's a number of things there.
No, they're not. They're not poor choices. They're the choices they want to make for you. Now, in your opinion, they're poor. In Apple's opinion, it's the right decision for you, Joff.
Without a doubt, this is a subjective statement, right? But I've reached the point whereby I need to upgrade. I am not enthused by Apple's choice to go with their own custom chipset, with their argument, if you want to call it that way, or their ongoing conflict with VMware. That is a significant issue for me, because I depend on virtualization technology. I have to have it.
And has VMware and Apple, had that handshake agreement and said no? Yeah. That's going to be a deal breaker for a lot of instructors like yourselves, like Larry and Joff especially, right? That's a deal breaker.
They have not kissed and made up. And then you look at the dollars, and oh my God, I can bring in a laptop with 48, 64 gig of RAM, so much cheaper than I can even do a MacBook with 32 gig of RAM. I mean, and RAM and disk matters for what we do.
And you can replace it.
And I can replace it. And so now there's some, when I finally pull the trigger, which I will shortly, there's going to be some transition pain. But, honestly, but somewhere between VMware and browsers, I'm probably okay.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Now, John, and anyone else, have you seen, Adrian has one of these laptops, and I really like it. It might be my next laptop. Yeah. It's called Frame.work. And they've got these, I think it all connects on USB-C, and they've got these modules. So it's basically an Intel-based laptop, and you can configure it to your specs. They support some of the pretty latest, Intel-based processors and RAM configurations. You can get a pretty beefy one. But the thing that I like about it is it's very modular, and they make available all these different modules, including hard drives and such. And so you can swap these little devices in. And so when you order it, I think it comes with 4 configurable ports by default. So you can say one's DisplayPort, one's HDMI, one's USB-C, one's an additional hard drive or whatever. And you can order extra ones, and you can swap them in and out. And I was like, and he really likes it.
Reasonably affordable.
Yep, and they're not
reasonably
affordable. Yep.
Paul, I want to
think
step
that-
back on this a little bit too, but Joff,
Yeah.
go ahead first.
Oh well, I just think that's an interesting concept. I'm kind of in the shopping mode right now and looking for options. I may actually take a look at that.
Also, talk to Tyler when I need to buy a laptop. I talk to Tyler. Just saying.
Yep. Tyler's good at spending your money.
Yes.
What we've all got to realize is there's going to be a point in time when the world opens up again, and having something that's extremely portable and lightweight is going to matter. It doesn't matter so much now, but it's going to matter again in the future. And that is a pretty big factor in the decision, because there's nothing worse than carrying around lots of weight on planes and doing all that. So.
Yep. Anywhere. Which is why I love my 13-inch laptop. Work had standardized on the 15, and I'm like, it's too big. Give me a 13. But it's no screen real estate. Like, for the amount of time that I use it remote, it's fine. 13-inch real estate.
That doesn't matter, right?
I use it at my desk with a big ass display.
Yeah, the weight is what matters the most, right? As long if you can come home, throw it in a dock or hook up your big ass display. Who cares what the display the laptop has on it? Frankly,
yep,
right?
I can deal with it for short periods of time with the 13-inch, and it's just fine.
Yeah.
So if I can step back on two of those, first one will hit the VMware thing. Absolutely, VMware no M1 support, and they have no intention of supporting the M1 processor in the Apple to do virtualization to be able to support Intel-based virtual machines. They say that the last I saw on Twitter was that VMware is saying, there's no market for it, like nobody will buy it, which I think is bullshit, and I think it's just a tactic. Yeah, exactly. Yep. The other one, back to Linus's comments about the applications, and Paul, you went down the road of it's hard to build an application and have a good application store. When I had to update my laptop, this was a couple of years ago, and you may remember me showing up to the studio with a Chromebook that I had dropped Linux on, because I wasn't convinced that I could spend the $4,000 on a fully equipped MacBook Pro to get rid of my 2011 MacBook Pro. Like, this thing was 9 years old, or 8 years old. And I was trying Linux on the desktop as a test to see if I could do what I needed to do. And I will tell you, of the essential applications that I needed on those days, every single one of the Linux versions or the Linux comparable applications all sucked. Like Evernote, TweetDeck, Slack. Slack was about the only one that was reasonable, and all the stuff that I used sucked.
Well, yeah, if you've got like full client applications that you rely on either Mac OS or Windows, a lot of those aren't going to necessarily transfer over to Linux, right? And one of the things that helped me was I have an outstanding production team that does the audio and video editing, and those are really some of the only applications that the rest of them, like my feed reader, I switched to a cloud-based, browser-based system. So a lot of my applications were replaced by the browser. I don't care. I'm really social media. We could have a totally different discussion about where I'm at with social media. So I really didn't care. In the early days when I switched to Linux, I tried some of those really crappy, social media applications. And you're right, Larry. They really suck. But in that wasn't the reason why. My gripe with social media wasn't the applications. It was the social media platforms themselves. And I think for a lot of stuff, my applications work great, and they've gotten better in recent years as well. Even in the past few years, the applications have gotten a lot better. Edge, Microsoft Edge on Linux runs great. It runs great as a browser.
So that's really interesting.
I've never been a fan of the browser-based stuff, but maybe I need to start rethinking that, especially where, like, if my next upgrade for Mac is going to be an M1, and those things haven't been resolved. Now, admittedly, that's going to be multi-years away, given the track record I have with my Macs, 7 or 8 years, and both of them were bought in 2021.
Right.
Oh, sorry, in 2020. So, like, I've got another 7 years before I have to make a decision, but maybe I need to start getting on the bandwagon now with some of the cloud-based, browser-based apps. I just don't particularly like them.
Yeah.
because it's a browser.
VMs aren't always the answer, but sometimes they are for less frequently used applications. VirtualBox actually works really well, and it's free.
Unless you use USB stuff, and then you're fucked.
Right. But for running applications, right? If you've got a lean Windows 10 VirtualBox VM and you build it from the start with VirtualBox, and use the VirtualBox, virtual disks and all that stuff, it works really well.
Well, here's why I don't think it's the year of the Linux desktop.
Oh, can we not get away from the year of the Linux? I told you.
You started it.
He did.
Here's why I don't think it is. I love Linux and I love Unix, and I've been using these products since time immemorial. The problem, not for me and not for you and not for everybody that's on the screen there.
Yep.
The problem is there are too many choices.
Yes.
In Linux. And the fact that if you pull it up and you say, I want a social media platform, there's 100. Mm-hmm. And that's not what average users want. Average users want to pull it up and say, here's what I use. Mm-hmm. They want to pull it up and say, Edge, that's there. That's what I use. I'm done. I don't have to sit here and read reviews and go to YouTube channels and try to figure out which one of these is the one that's going to work for me.
Is it Chromium or Chrome or Firefox or Edge?
Yeah,
or Opera,
and there's
right?
there's so many options, and I think that's why. I mean, and from a support perspective on the IT side, I think it's the same issue. I mean, that's why corporate doesn't adopt Linux, because even though it's free, there's just too many options there, and it's just so much easier to say, I want to drop this in, I want to run it. I don't want to have to deal with service calls, because I've seen that. I've seen people pass policies that say no Linux. I mean, I've seen there's no Linux on our corporate network. Why? Because they don't want to support it. They don't want people calling in and going, oh, I just compiled this new thing and it doesn't work. And
there's also the security of it, which quite frankly is not great. Like, to be quite honest with you, because I also think that the management tools is the same problem you're talking about, Doug. And there's a laundry list of ways in which you can manage Linux, and a lot of them require your own. And here's am I using Ansible, Puppet, or Chef to manage all my Linux configurations?
And here's what's about to happen. The cloud, meaning Azure and Amazon, is about to reel everybody in. They're starting to test the line, and they're saying, we're going to reel everybody in. We're going to pull you all into Azure, and then we own you, because you'll never get away then. I think that's about to happen. I mean, we're not very far from that. And Linux doesn't have that, that unified approach. It's just very distributed. It's just very distributed. Oh, I mean, the whole idea of Linux is just anathema to average users. I mean, the idea that you can do what you want. I mean, it's a hobbyist thing.
You're right. Us on the show and most listening like that we can use half a dozen or more different virtualization platforms. Your average user may not even use a virtualization platform. If they do, they want to use like VMware.
It's a difference in buying an MG and a Ford. If you buy an MG, you're a hobbyist. You want to tinker with it. You want to poke at it, and it's going to break a lot. You buy that Ford because you go out and start it in the morning and you drive to work, and maybe you don't get any joy out of it, but the point was to get to work, not because you need to go out and spend 35 minutes trying to get the carburetor adjusted so it would start.
I'd like to make one comment, and we have all completely neglected to mention the 800-pound elephant in the room.
Is that freedom? Because I like freedom.
Freedom. No. It's Microsoft Office. You all know that Microsoft Office is the resounding reason that people stick with that platform. That is the application.
Yeah, and it runs great. It runs great. It runs great in Edge. I'm saying I use all the cloud apps in Edge. And it runs fine.
He's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Yeah, it runs fine.
He's absolutely not.
You know what? It's also less crap I have to install on my desktop.
I 100% agree with that. I mean, that's the 72-pound.
That's the other thing that allowed me to be Linux on the desktop. Like, I'd probably still be Mac if it wasn't for some of the things like that. Well, if not for G Suite and not for Office or Microsoft 365. All that crap runs in the cloud now.
I made this concerted, dedicated effort to run Linux, and all I ever ended up doing was running Windows apps on Linux. And exactly. I was like, okay, I'm taking a product I need to use. Whether I like it or not, I need to use it. And I'm running it on this other platform, out of some kind of stubbornness that says, I'm going to run Unix. By God, I'm going to run it.
I think I've been Linux for 5 years, Doug. And if you haven't tried making the switch in the past 5 years, I mean, there is a sharp contrast between today and 5 years ago.
I could, but I mean, then I'm still back in that. Here's the stuff I need to runs on Windows, so I can run it on Linux. But why? I mean, look at this. This cost $200, and I didn't have to spend days and days and days trying to get it to work.
Yeah, in my opinion, the only thing that gives Linux, the only thing that gives Linux as a desktop as a chance, frankly, is the fact that we do have cloud
correct.
as the predominant paradigm. Because when the browser becomes the operating system, who the fuck cares what's underneath it?
You're right. No, and nobody will even see it, so it won't make any difference to you. But then it's an Apple, right? It's just a cheap Apple.
So I was going to say, Doug, that there's the three answers to your issue of having too many choices to try and get what the user really wants that have been successful Linux, Unix deployments have been the Android, the Chromebook, and the Mac, where you're not in a pure Linux environment. You've got a framework around it that addresses the very concerns that you mentioned, which is why Android has 85% of the market or something like that for smartphones, because it just works.
No, I completely agree.
You imagine delivering a smartphone running BSD?
Imagine if Amazon adopted Linux as their back end and then put out desktops. If only it would run Office, they'd own the world.
So what was the big argument before for Linux, right? Like, it was free, so it was a cost savings. That was like the biggest thing, and that's not really a big argument anymore, right? Because
but Tyler, to your point, I think for me it's about choice. Like, if I want to spend the time to configure something and make it work the way I want, I'm very conscious about those choices. Like, if I want to go down a rabbit hole, I can. When I'm on Windows, and more importantly, if I'm on an Apple platform, I can't. Like, I don't have much of a choice as to, like, in certain circumstances what I use and how I use it. I don't have that choice, and that's why I chose to go to Linux, because most of the stuff works without me having to do much. But if I want to make something work specifically for me in a certain way, I have that choice, and I make those choices. I don't often want to go down some of those rabbit holes. I'll be quite honest with you. I don't want to be compiling kernels. I don't want to be customizing drivers and like all that stuff. But if I do want to go down those roads for certain things, I can.
Hobbyist versus user.
Yeah.
But I mean, there was. I mean, to go back to one of Lou's examples, Lou and I spent, I don't even know how many days trying to get Gentoo to run his music card.
Well, there's your first mistake. You're trying to run Gentoo.
I understand, but I mean, but that was drunken hobbyists having a good time.
Sure. Yeah.
But at some point, I said, Lou, if we just put Windows on this machine,
it would work.
We'd already be done.
But it's back to my point that I think Joff really resonated with Joff very well, was the hardware manufacturers and Linux kernel developers have to work really well together for us to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we're at.
They do. That's where it's at. The driver stuff. That's if there's anything that Microsoft has done extraordinarily well.
The drivers are amazing.
Is they locked in that driver stuff. I mean, they lock that shit in, and people know. They go down to their local Best Buy and they pick up something, and it's just going to work.
Because Microsoft has created a framework that if you make hardware and you want it to work with Windows, there's a framework you have to work in. And Microsoft owns a lot more of that supply chain than you would in Linux, right? And that's why.
And I still like it for my servers, and I love it when I want to fool around. But when I just need to get something done because I don't really want to spend the next 4 hours trying to get something to work, I just use this, and then I'm done. I don't have to worry about that.
80% of our production environment here is still Windows, and I'm not going to change that for exactly what you're saying, Doug. Right? Exactly what you're saying. Yeah.
And Doug, that's the same reason why I still love the Mac, because it very much it follows the thing that Paul told me when I made the switch to the Mac. I'm like, dude, how do you burn a DVD? And he's like, double click. And I'm like, how do you open this? He's like, double click. I'm like, you just click shit and it works.
Right.
Like, I mean,
so if I want to play the guitar through my computer, I just want to turn it on and have it work. But if I want to fool with it, I'm all over. Let's go get Gentoo out. Let's go get the nastiest, awfulest distro that ever existed out and say, well, let's write some drivers, baby.
Right.
Can I tell you
speaking of stuff that just works.
The final straw for me.
Okay.
as soon as I installed Windows Terminal, I was like, okay, well, this got SSH. I'm good. Right? I mean, honestly.
He's not wrong. He's not wrong.
Yeah.
Concur.
Tyler's going to comment in here.
No, I was just saying. Speaking of things that Microsoft does well that works, we should talk about Microsoft Exchange and how Auto Discover just works.
Oh, there's a lot of Windows bugs
Tyler,
that just
you had
work.
to throw a
That's a
bomb.
great segue
Jesus.
because we spent a lot of time on talking about that. But yeah, Tyler,
And
tell us
move
about this
on.
auto. What is this auto?
Auto Discover. So Auto Discover's been around since Exchange forever ago.
It sounds vulnerable. Like just the phrase auto discover, like it just sounds
The minute
vulnerable.
you say
The
auto.
minute you say it, I'm like, that's vulnerable. Like that has.
Oh, it's right. It's been ripe for picking for a while. So yeah, the Auto Discover is essentially the easy way that clients can configure Exchange configurations, and they exchange those configurations via like XML files based on DNS names. Typically, you have like an Auto Discover DNS name that points to a certain endpoint. Well, they found out that the Auto Discover, if it times out upon its potential discovery and it cannot do the auto discovery with the right endpoint, it'll begin to cycle through some of its own things that it thinks auto discover should look for, which is not, it is by design, but it's not the behavior you'd expect. So things like TLDs for autodiscover.example.com.tw, right? If it couldn't find its auto discover, it would start cycling through some other things, Brazil, autodiscover.xyz, some of the other TLDs to see if it could find that discovery XML file.
It's trying to be helpful. I mean, we've preyed upon the fact that Microsoft operating systems protocols in implementations like in in directory services like to help out not just the user but like the system itself. I think we come down to this common denominator. Make it easier and make things work by default without you, the administrator, having to intervene.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so upon that exchange, as part of that, you enter your credentials in order to authenticate to that endpoint device wherever AutoDiscover's at, and it does an NTLM exchange. Well, you can send it a specific response that downgrades it and says, hey, I would like to do basic auth, and therefore you end up with a base 64 authentication request or response that has your credentials within inside of that. So
I feel like we've seen this type of style or technique be successful in a wide variety of Microsoft protocols, Tyler.
Yeah, and the bad thing about this is now that Auto Discover is one of the standardized configurations for almost all Exchange servers. I'm not sure if this actually applies to O365, but there is Auto Discover that you have to put in place for O365 to work. So this is something I've not looked at, whether or not this actually works with 365. I would hope the pre-authentication requests drop basic and they use like OAuth or something as part of that for O365, but I don't know. But I do know that this does work with almost all current versions of Exchange, and that's a pretty bad thing. So there's some interesting things you can kind of play with on that.
So doesn't it strike you, though, I just had this amazing thought, which I've had before, by the way, but one of the downfalls that Microsoft has continually fought with has been trying to address the professional and the consumer market with the same product. And everything you're talking about is, any of these auto discovery kind of mechanisms generally are more on the consumer end of the market. Now, I'm not saying that exclusively that way, but I do think that Microsoft has suffered that kind of a schizophrenic split over time, where they're trying to address both ends of the market and they end up shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, Joff, it's interesting you say that. Like, why hasn't Microsoft, I think they tried this with Windows 10 with Home versus Pro, right?
Yeah.
But they could almost take that to an extreme and be like, here's Windows Enterprise, This is what you use for your business. Here's your operating system. And is Windows 11 kind of going in? I might be going in this way too. And then here's what home users use, right? And there's like two completely different systems. They've kind of, like, to your point, Joe, blended these things together and it gets messy.
Right.
Those feature sets are trying to merge and become more synonymous with like O365 subscriptions and tenancies, and even Azure Workspaces is trying to get away from that whole separation of enterprise and home and kind of have the same backend platform with add-on features. Right. Which the only difference between them is what features those support, whether that's domain additions, whether that's BitLocker, certain BitLocker encryption and TPM support. So different pieces of that for enterprise versus home, where they don't need some of that security code.
They probably don't want to support two different versions of the operating system, right? That would be too costly for Microsoft. We got Windows Enterprise and we got Windows Home, and they're completely freaking different.
I think they just they get sort of entranced by the ease. So the home side of it is very simple. You know, the idea is you turn it on and it works. And what happens is that ease at home starts leaking into the enterprise, because the IT people there want it to be easy too. Now you could go back into that back end. So you can go back into all those GPOs and all that stuff. Sure. And when you start doing that, things stop working and things get complicated. And suddenly it's like, wow, this is hard. And so you want to go back toward that easy place that you've got on the other side, and that's where all the security problems start to sneak in there, because you don't configure it correctly. Because I see that all the time.
There's no easy button.
Which they are trying to get away with the Windows Live, and having everybody have that single sign-on that then has security controls on the back end that's all handled and managed by ATP feeding Defender and having some advanced analytics. And I eventually think they're going to have subscriptions that you can, enhance the security if you do certain things on this laptop for a small business.
That's that reeling them in, the thing I was talking about, where they just want to reel in. They want to reel in the home users, and they're going to reel in the enterprise user and go, look what, just let us all handle it. Well, it's all back here. You don't know how it works.
Well, you
just
see that today when you install Windows.
Hell yeah!
It's like you don't want to create a local account. You want
Why
to have
would you
it
do
online.
that? That's insane.
You want a Microsoft or an Azure AD account.
Yeah. Don't get carried away.
There's another Windows bug that's interesting that was highlighted by Eclipsium, and this is I don't know how much of it is I don't know how much of it's Windows, how much of it's EFI, but I thought this was really interesting, and I wish when John Lucades came on, he was on Enterprise Security Weekly, I think last week, and this had not been announced yet, but there's a new bug. This is a Microsoft Windows Platform Binary Table, WPBT, and the way I understood this, like I want to WPBT. So this feature provides,
what now?
Yeah, it provides the ability to persistently execute system software in the context of Windows, and these have to be as secure as possible so we don't expose Windows users to exploitable conditions. Now, they also say that WPBT solutions must not include malware. So the way I kind of understood this was that the mechanism can accept a signed binary with revoked or expired certificate to bypass the integrity check. So what I'm hearing is, if like you can put a binary in the UEFI system, the operating system will just trust that. And the way in which it trusts that is somewhat vulnerable, which means I can wipe the operating system, but if my binaries live in the UEFI firmware, like they're going to get copied over and they're going to run and execute.
Persist,
and there was like a specific reason that they did this, so like you could always have binaries that ran and executed for the administrative functions, but attackers could abuse this to get your code to run in with these
because the order that stuff loads.
So those
binaries load first,
right?
So they can't rely on operating system controls to manage their permission level, so they become in and of themselves inherently insecure.
We were talking about this today, like the EFI, and I verified this with John Lucades, because I'm like, I create this partition for EFI,
Yep.
And he's like, yeah, it's just a FAT32 file
Yeah, it
system.
is.
I'm like, so wait, that means that like UEFI knows how to read and write files to FAT32, which means it can just copy these binaries over and run them.
And that
the operating system runs them.
partition becomes the Wild West because it exists outside of
the operating system.
Correct. Which means GPOs, all that stuff doesn't apply. So if somebody reboots that UEFI partition is just sitting there, and the regular operating system doesn't care. It doesn't even look at it. Very scary.
There's reasons for that, though. You start to think about MDM, and if you were able to just get past secure boot into something different. There's a lot of memory patching bypasses for logins that does kind of the same thing. Upon boot, it patches the memory location on UEFI boot that allows you to patch that specific piece of memory you're using for login code that Windows is looking at.
Yep.
And so these things like these binaries, anti-theft, LoJack back in the day used to be on chip. Now it can be done much cheaper with things in memory binaries being ran from UEFI. There's a lot of cases where this happens, but things like Mac or Mac OS hardware, where you're talking about like a MacBook, a lot of this MDM stuff runs on chip, and there's memory locations on chip that has some of the same functionality. It's just done a little bit different. So I think that abuse is going to happen no matter which platform you're on, and I think we're just starting to see like malware and persistence is going to become a BIOS problem and a firmware issue that's going to be very hard to address in the very near, probably within the next 2 years, I think.
Completely agree.
Well, look at that the application Dell was in there that was phoning home, but it's out there, it's happening, and I think it'd be awesome if you wanted to have take over machines, put something in the BIOS that loads, and you could have it phone home to you forever.
Yep,
basically.
Speaking of other 0 days, that awesome one from Mac OS was pretty cool. The command execution.
I flagged this one, and I didn't dig into it. I was relying on the.
So it uses what is it? iNet location, iNet loc for it's the function call that I think looks at the location of the file, but as part of that call, it executes code within that file or within that link or that call, if I remember right. But it goes all the way from Big Sur down. And the patch for that, there was even a couple bypasses where it was just using camel case or different variations of file call or file inclusions.
See, this is why you should run Linux.
Because that's completely secure.
Just had to.
Yeah, but it is a reminder to all of us that, and we've said this often, people love to pick on Windows, but when you're the big target that's out there and you've been attacked over and over and over and over, you've actually done the work to actually harden your operating system. Mac OS and Linux, not so much.
I agree. I agree. A $5.9 million ransom attack on a farming co-op may cause a food shortage. That's the sensational headline.
Yeah.
Damn these people and causing the food. They cause a food shortage because they address causing a food shortage because of another ransomware. Like the media is at fault for causing shortages.
No, I completely agree. Now, what's interesting is that Black Matter is the ransomware, for lack of a better term, the cyber criminal group that's using ransomware. I hate to say ransomware group because but anyway, they have a policy that they won't attack critical infrastructure. Right. And my whole thing is are we how are we negotiating with criminals and expecting them to follow rules, and specifically ones that they created? So the farming co-op is no, we're critical infrastructure, so you should remove your ransomware. What world are you living in? You're living in a fantasy world. They really care about following their own rules. They want $5.9 million. You can be oh, no, you know what? That was a mistake. You're right. We didn't read our own policies. And you're really critical infrastructure. We're sorry. You don't have to pay the ransom, and we'll just remove it. What? Oh, God.
No.
What?
I think they were a little confused
what got me is that, remember earlier this year, Biden went to Russia and said there's 16 areas we don't want you to mess with that are critical. One of them is farming and agriculture, food and agriculture, excuse me. And Black Matter says, that doesn't meet the criteria of critical and isn't covered by our ethics code. I'm like, who the hell relies on the hackers to whether or not they're going to hack you? Or wouldn't you better sit there?
You remember in The Godfather when they were saying, like, I don't want it sold in schoolyards, I don't want it sold to children. You know, I'm like,
okay. It's just like, but it's gonna happen.
This was the most desperate post I've ever seen. It's like, we're critical infrastructure. You guys said you were good guys. Please don't do it.
Stop picking on me.
Yeah. I'm like, and they're going, you know what? Now the ransom's $11 million.
Right. Like, seriously.
Ransomware as a service, though, as it stands, like, they're not the group that's deciding who is infiltrating. They're taking a percentage of it. And I think they got their terming right. Like, Black Matter as a group, whatever it's been rebranded as, like, these people are developing software and selling it based on a percentage. The infiltration and usually initial access is done by a different group sometimes. There is times where Black Matter, the group, is doing the ransoming, but who can tell and who knows whether or not this is Black Matter, this is one of their affiliate groups, this is someone that's done infiltration and ransomed using their software and is under their name? Like, there's a lot of things at play here.
It's crazy. Did anyone read my story number 20? How to explain public key cryptography and digital signatures to non-techies?
Out of all of the ones I didn't read, I did not read that one.
Right?
Likewise.
So
describe it for us, Paul.
It made me more confused than ever, because they're like, think of it as a lock that has keys, right? And
okay.
If the key is in the middle and it's completely vertical, that means it's unlocked. And your private key can only turn to the right, but your public key can only turn to the left. And so you give everyone the public key, and then you only keep the multiple public keys, and you give the private key to yourself. And I'm like, somehow I'm more confused than I was before.
No,
like so I'm not the only one. I was like, I liked the analogy where like the key is one static key. We're talking about symmetric cryptography, right? And asymmetric basically means my key split in two, right? Mm-hmm. And anyone can have half my key because they don't have the other half. Like, to me, that just made like a lot more sense when it was explained to me that way versus the lockbox where keys can only the public key can only turn to the left. And I didn't like it. I didn't like it.
I'm skimming through it now, and I'm like,
no,
my brain hurts. Like,
there's too many lock positions.
To your point, Larry, we should be able to skim through it and go, oh yeah, like, cool, that makes sense as an analogy. And whether you've read it or just skimmed through it, it's like, I don't know, my brain kind of hurt. Maybe that's because we know some of or a lot of the technical details behind this and we're confused, perhaps, but I don't know. I'm still not.
I mean, it's the whole idea of PKI, public-private keys, is you do something with my public key and I can access it with my private key. I can give anybody my public key, but the private key is what I keep a secret.
Because your private key is like the half. Well, I don't know if necessarily the half, but I think of it as the half essentially of the portion of the key that only I know, and I give the other half to whoever I want, but they don't have the full keys, right? That just makes way more. Joff, you want to weigh in here? Right?
Really simple.
Look, don't overcomplicate it. Yeah. I mean, the mathematics is actually very pure. Public key cryptography fundamentally is based on prime number exponentiation, and the fact that you can't reverse that, you can't get that answer back. It's like a one-way algorithm, right?
Right. RSA is what introduced the prime number aspect to
truly that is RSA, right? But fundamentally, you are right. Public-private key cryptography is about splitting that key.
Yep.
Okay, that's great.
That was like, much like Doc Brown hit his head and came up with the flux capacitor. Like Whitfield Diffie, I feel like went through a similar thing. It was like, what if I just split the key, right? Like,
split the key. Yeah. Oh my God, split the key. And honestly, symmetric key cryptography, going to that side of the fence, is not that complicated.
No.
I mean, certainly the mathematics with SBox substitution, with shift left, shift right, with in the algorithm itself. I have written source code to implement AES, so I do know this, right? Symmetric key cryptography is also not that complex, right? I mean, in fact, you can just boil it down to XOR. All right? If people want to understand it, if you understand the mathematical function of exclusive OR, then you understand symmetric key cryptography. The end. All right? That's it.
The point being, Jeff, I think this article was trying to explain this to my mom. God rest her soul, whose VCR blinked 12 until the day she died. For her to understand, what was it? You said asymmetric XOR. That had blown her mind.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you how I explain it. I explained it like it's like an apartment mailbox. And,
I've seen cryptocurrency explained the similar way in the safety deposit box.
Right. And asymmetric key is like the mail person has a key that opens this big door, and they can put mail in any box. Only you can get your mail out of your box with your key.
Yeah, except in that one, the mail person can take whatever's in the boxes.
Well, we're not going to. We're assuming they're a reliable federal employee. Right. And symmetric encryption meant that they have a whole ring of keys that they have to turn.
Yes,
they have to
correct.
open each individual box and put the mail in, and then you have a key. You have the same key, and you can open the box and take the mail out. And
I think analogies in that sense, Doug, don't have to hold up 100% of the.
No, they don't. I mean, you're just trying to give people the basic idea without them getting freaked out because you start saying things like XOR and things, and then that boy, they run for the hills when you start that stuff.
Right.
So I would simplify the symmetric key part of your algorithm is that everybody has the same key, because a symmetric key that's basically it's a shared password.
Right.
And it's one password. In fact, with secure MIME email, the secure part, what they encrypt is a symmetric key because it's really slow to decrypt, and they need a little faster algorithm than that. You need a streaming algorithm, not a block. So and I'm getting into the weeds, but really all the real secrecy is over trading that key, and then it decrypts things fast. So
I did want to
PKI are hard.
I wanted to transition off of encryption technology for a moment and talk about something a little more lighthearted and fun, which I think is
fun.
Yeah, I have a couple stories.
Cryptography's
what's more fun than crypto?
Cryptography is fun, right? But I want to talk about something a little less technical because I have a couple of fun stories. One is that back in the day, you could rent your phone, and it was cheaper for you, like from the 60s on. At some point, the phone companies
But wait. In some cases, the only way you could have a telephone on your line was if it was approved device by AT&T.
Yes.
So you had no choice but to rent it.
A Bakelite black phone.
They did. You're right, Larry. They tried to Exploding the Phone. That book, great book, goes through that the phone companies very much wanted to control the hardware that was used to interface with the telephones. It's how they prosecuted people that were creating blue boxes and the like, because that was not approved telephony devices.
Telephony equipment.
Right, equipment.
The sad part is, Paul, I still have the avocado-ish green, because it's aged,
yummy
rotary dial telephone with the 4-pin connector that my parents had to rent from Ma Bell.
Right.
For their home when they built it in 1968.
So
I still have it, and I found one identical to it in an antique shop for $110 last week.
So Cory Doctorow, who's awesome, obviously, maintains a blog. One of the posts he makes is this day in history. And so 15 years ago, there was a story that an elderly woman had rented a phone in 1960, and then that had been updated in, I believe it was 1984 or something like that, and had been paying these fees to rent the phone. And I think when she passed away, her children, bless you, were going through the bills and figured out that from 1985 to 1986, customers who leased telephones were given the option to continue leasing, and every 3 months she paid $29.10, meaning
Holy
like her
crap.
phone cost her $2,000.
Wow.
And there's still,
Just wow.
at the time of this running, they talked about how there was nationwide 750,000 people still leasing phones as of 15 years ago. I don't know what that number looks like now.
Business level genius.
Right?
I mean, because they did the same thing with compilers. I did a consulting job once, and I had a client.
Oh, yeah, like Borland used to charge a lot of money for
and
their
the client
compilers,
said,
yeah.
could you just go through all this stuff because we don't know what any of it means? And we were going through this thing, and we found they were paying IBM a monthly lease fee for a COBOL compiler. And I said, so are you using COBOL for something? And they said, what the hell's COBOL? And I said, well, you're paying like $800 a month for a COBOL compiler lease. And they said, we don't even know what that is. And I'm like, yeah. And that's the same thing with the phones. They got people to just basically go out there and sign up, and it becomes a part of your life. It's a cable TV model. And, you know, you get used to the bill. The bill's always the same. And they know that people look at their bill every month. And what they don't want is the bill to change. Because I remember my parents sending me stuff and going, why did our bill change? Could you look at this and tell me what this means? And if it didn't change, my dad paid it every month. And he would have been paying that, you know, forever.
For the phone.
But if
and just to go show that the monthly subscription fees for something over years doesn't change anything. Like, I think about how many things that I subscribe to that I barely use, if not use, and I pay a monthly fee for, like Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
I went to look up some stuff once and I had to sign up, and like shit, I forgot to cancel that shit 2 years ago.
What a racket.
I've been paying them $10 a month.
It's a racket.
Like, Jesus.
I try to do that once a year. I try to go through all my credit cards. In fact, one of my strategies is cancel all your credit cards once a year and get new ones. Because like I did this recently. I canceled all my cards because we were going to buy a new house, and I was like, I'm going to get rid of all these cards so that, you know, we don't have any weird stuff out there. And I got all these emails from stuff going like, your $3.99 a month bill has not been paid, and I'm like, what is this even? What is it? And it was something I subscribed to. I was like, okay,
it was your porn subscription.
It's
from $3.99
a month for tentacleporn.com. And, you know, and you don't even think about it. And then it's just like, you just keep paying it forever. And as long as it doesn't change, nobody notices it because it's a typical thing that you get every month. And I was like, this is just so bad. It's such a great business model, though.
I also had an article from our friend Larry, we've covered Neil Krawitz. Did I say that right? Neil Krawitz.
Yep.
Always has interesting I mean, he's one of the folks that like consistently we've covered his interesting posts. And like sometimes it's more related to security than others, but this one's all about like dealing it's titled Out with the Old. It's like, how do you deal with all the old hardware that you have? Right? And
like,
I mean,
when going through this post, I read this and I'm like, holy crap, you still had CRTs and you had to get rid of 3 of them?
Right.
Like,
I purged that shit a long time ago.
Dude, you have a problem. Like, you need to get rid of the stuff. Yeah, you need more room in your office. Get rid of the damn CRTs. Like,
he must have a really big
You know
house
what I put in the dumpster? I have a dumpster in my driveway because we're going to move, but I literally was like going through stuff in my basement. I was like, wow, this is a modem. I'm like, I've got a modem. I got some. It was unbelievable.
Because we always want to, and like you see some of the stuff on set here too, right?
Yeah.
Like some of the stuff we've kept and we put on set, and we keep it for the nostalgic value that it holds. In this article, Neil's like, there was actually an old computer that he had that had some old code that he wanted to recover, and what he was saying, and I may have like read this once a long time ago. But and Doug, I know you've probably done this before. If you take a hard drive and like you tap it gently, like with your
Stiction. Stiction.
I don't know if like the heads and the platters are kind of like if it's sat for like 15 years, it unsticks it.
Unstick it.
Do you hit it with a hammer or do you drop it on the ground?
A rubber mallet is the technique that is preferred by experts everywhere.
So he was like, so Neil's really funny in this description because he's like, look, I don't want to start taking apart this computer to get at the hard drive
so you just toss
to be able to hit it. So what he did was he
dropped it.
So he intentionally dropped the 30-pound desktop computer a few inches onto some cardboard. He says the cardboard protected the floor.
I've heard of this technique.
And the drop gave it a sharp tap, and then it turned on and it worked. I thought that was really cool.
You remember, I don't know if you remember this. People used to put hard drives in freezers and get them really cold, and I guess that would
it would shrink it just enough to break
and that
the
would
seal.
break it loose. And then you took it out, tapped it with a hammer, and plugged it back in.
But I'm sure, like, whatever platter and whatever sector the head was on
is wrecked.
Yep. But all the other sectors might be good because they haven't been touched.
Or it just goes.
Yeah. Or
you want to hear an amazing story about stiction? When I was in high school, I made friends with this kid when I was a senior. Who was a freshman, who was totally into computers and stuff, and he didn't have a lot of money, so I gave him a computer, and it was like an IBM XT, like the original IBM XTs with the two big black face plates where 5 1/4 drives used to be, and the drive was trash, and it was only like 10 megs or whatever, but he loved this thing, and he got this thing to work, and all of a sudden one day he says, hey, it's not booting up, it doesn't sound like the hard drive's spinning, and I said, just give it a little tap, like the infield tactile maneuver. And he gives it a little tap and it starts booting. And he's like, oh my God, this is awesome. And it progressively got worse and worse.
That happens.
And his comment was like, I can't make this thing any worse. So he took a computer part, took the top off the hard drive. And he found that when he would boot the computer up, it didn't have enough power to spin the drive. So he'd lift the top off the drive and spin the platters from the middle of the thing and put the top back on, and his computer would work.
That was what Lou had to do with his washing machine. He had to get the
he
thing
did that
moving.
for 2 years. He did that for 2 years.
Oh my God!
Take the top off, boom, zing, boom. All right.
Oh my God!
That's hilarious.
Okay, I got to say, I never did that.
Do the manual spin. Yep.
The manual spin.
Crazy. I had higher hopes for this article about how the mafia is pivoting into cybercrime. Like, I was really hoping for something, like, because I love mafia history, growing up in Rhode Island and being Italian. Like, we watch The Godfather every Thanksgiving and I think Christmas. Like, it's a big part of, like,
it's a family holiday movie.
It's a family holiday movie, right? The horse head in the bed and all that stuff.
Is that where the Thanksgiving incident comes from?
No, it is not where the Thanksgiving incident comes from. Although Ed Scotus has one of the greatest, I think, observations of the Godfather movie, and we've seen this on the Social Engineering podcast, and we use body language and tells and body language in social engineering, right? And there's people that have written books on it and thesis about body language, and they can tell if people are lying and things like that, right? Mm-hmm. And Ed Scotus is one of the people that, like, pointed out, like, the scene in The Godfather, and you hinted towards this earlier, Doug, where the other mafia boss comes to him and wants to use, Don Corleone's criminal network to distribute drugs. Mm-hmm. And he has to tell him, like, Marlon Brando has to tell him no. And it's so beautifully designed. And, like, I watched this movie growing up, and it wasn't until Ed was like, no, watch that scene again. And he pours him a drink, and he brushes off his leg, and just the whole body language and the way he does that. And he's basically telling him, like, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
It's a brilliant scene.
It's just a brilliant, brilliant scene. So I was expecting something as, like, brilliant and really thought-provoking from an article titled, how the mafia is pivoting to cybercrime. Like, it turns out they're just using they're just cyber criminals. Like, it's
crime.
It may be more organized than it was. Like, they've got people from the Italian police and Spain's
we're organized.
Police.
We're criminals.
But it's basically like the SIM swapping attacks and, like, all the stuff we're talking about. And they're like, oh yeah, like the mafia is just doing everything we've talked about in cybercrime. Like, there's really nothing interesting in this article, and I was really disappointed because I was hoping for something more prolific and thought-provoking, and I didn't find it.
Just pour yourself a glass of Montenegro and
grappa, right?
Or Montenegro. I mean, it's like or any of those wonderful digestifs in Italy. And
I was disappointed. Also, here we are in 2021, and we're still talking about secure updates and protocols to IoT devices because there was a group that found that. Who was the group that found it? It was a group that found that.
Is this your story number 16?
No, number 6.
Okay, I want to hit 16 because that's awesome.
They're both IoT. Similar. So my story number 6 is Grim. Oh, okay. That
Grim.
makes sense.
Oh, yeah,
Grim's
good old
awesome. So Grim found that there's a daemon that connects to Circle, and Circle's like Netgear's protocol to obtain version information and updates. And they noticed that the updates were unsigned and using HTTP.
Yep.
So like, again, here we are in 2021 talking about like validating firmware and using secure protocols to update the firmware on devices.
Make
like,
it work. Make it work.
Oh, God.
Yep.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even necessarily say whether it was firmware but still it's looking like filtering database. Like, this is still prime for abuse for machine in the middle. Like, just update the filtering database yourself to remove your filters.
Right.
Or add filters for everything and ransomware it.
Crazy. Story number 16 was IoT. In this, so my story number 16 was 100 million IoT devices are exposed by a zero-day bug. Very much in the messaging protocol.
MQTT.
MQTT. And we talked about similar protocols in the past that, like the messaging architecture, then the way the IoT devices are talking to the cloud services, that there's a flaw in that. There was a couple of months ago, Larry, right? We talked about the story of another IoT system, right? They were able to like insert themselves into the network, into the like kind of messaging protocol protocols in network that those devices were creating and pretend to be a legitimate device and take over someone else's device. This to me was very similar to that.
Yeah. So I mean, the irony is, we're going next week to teach the first run of Sec 556, the IoT class, and I didn't write all the content. We had another person, Stephen Warbrel, effectively write the day one content, which includes MQTT. So I have to study the content that he wrote.
Right.
So I've been spending the last week every night, reviewing day one slides because it's not content that I'm familiar with as much because it was written by someone else. And that's really, really it. I know about MQTT, but their delivery is different and the points that are trying to make are different. And yeah, we cover a whole big chunk on MQTT. And I'm like, oh my God, like I am teaching MQTT stuff next week. And here we have the MQTT messaging for 100 million devices vulnerable so that I can augment the case study we wrote like a month ago. Like, God damn it. There's too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was another story you had. I think one of you had something on the zero-click RCE for IoT devices for the security cameras.
Paul.
Oh, that was Lee.
Yep.
Hi,
number 5.
Hikvision Lee.
Yeah,
HIQ.
Number 5 for these.
Thank you.
Yeah, that one was interesting because that was just command injection via malicious messages, and apparently there was a ton of these cameras that were discovered in high security areas. I'm not familiar with this camera, which makes me wonder what high security areas are using this brand, but that's another thing.
I saw a great meme that was like, here's a picture from a satellite or a space station, that's millions of miles away and can, take a clear image of something on Earth. And then here's security footage from a bank camera, and like you can't recognize anything. And everything is all blurry, right?
From 10 feet away.
Yeah.
That's Ring. Ring's horrible.
Personal experience, Paul. We have a bunch of security cameras around the house, and I actually got famous again, and I got quoted in the local paper from some posts that we had in our local town Facebook group, because someone has been dropping panties and bras in people's driveways, like tossing them from their ar.
Someone.
Well, we had 4 of them over about a 2-month period show up in our driveway. And had been posting about it on the town group and stuff. And
I'm sure the wife had some questions for you when she walked.
Oh, yeah, believe me. There's a story behind this. But as we started talking about it on Facebook, like the Panty Bandit started expanding their delivery, like to the neighbors and to other streets and so forth. And we got another one. So I set up a camera facing the street. And sure enough, we caught them tossing undergarments out the window. But can you make out the model of the car and the license plate? No, the pictures are too goddamn grainy. But we can take a picture. We can take a picture of a pimple on my ass from space.
Right.
Like, this is ridiculous.
Water buffalo, female.
I did get some of you may know, like, I love Halloween. My kids love Halloween. We have a lot of Halloween decorations, and so like I've accumulated so many that I'm like, what interesting can I do this year with my Halloween decorations? And we're at the Halloween store, and I found this device that has a sensor. That when you trip the sensor, it's got like a motor with a pulley, and it can drop down a Halloween decoration that you can connect to it. So I had this like zombie thing, and when you walked through my front door, like it would drop this thing down, and it was like I had my ring set up, and I have the video of like the delivery person going like jumping up and down, and I'm like, I could create so many funny videos with this. Like they were totally freaked out about this like simple little prop kind of thing, but like you couldn't make out the person's face or maybe even what delivery service it was because the quality, to Tyler's point, on Ring is really poor.
And the sad part, Paul, is I probably could have built you something like that for about $8.
Right. Yes. I didn't pay. It was like maybe $15. It wasn't that expensive. So.
Okay, that worked.
Certainly cheaper than what they gouge you for decorations.
All I'm saying is looking over my shoulder here is,
nice.
There you go. It's Ampelman.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is Ampelman.
It is.
So
speaking
of cameras,
I actually got the lenses for that stoplight, for that walk light, while I was in Berlin.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, Ampelman from Berlin.
Yeah.
Speaking of cameras, I think we covered this story before, but it made an appearance in the Wall Street Journal, and my kind of whole take on this was like, privacy, please. So apparently this research is still ongoing, and the title is "Scientists are working on a toilet that identifies you by your butthole."
We've seen this story before.
I've seen that story.
We've seen pictures of this before.
I'm curious why it keeps coming. Like, this is within the past couple of weeks. This story made an appearance in the Wall Street Journal, where they're covering the researchers from Stanford School of Medicine that are developing a scanner that recognizes the user's unique, and I quote, it actually puts it in quotes, anal print or distinctive features of the anus, meaning the skin of the anal canal. To pull it off, a camera inside the bowl uses machine learning algorithms to match stool samples to specific users.
Once again, I have a lot of sympathy for the ML.
Right? The same thing with the Roomba vacuum. Dave Kennedy posted the Roomba vacuum.
Job.
And the new Roomba vacuum has the camera on it that can identify poop, which means they've trained a machine learning algorithm to identify poop, which I just want to be in the design meetings for that, because that must be hilarious. Like, the create version want to be like, oh, that was really crappy, because I'd be the one making that joke, right?
Now the question is, Paul, do you have one of these new Roomba devices with a camera?
No, I don't. So my wife and I were watching TV the other night, and we saw the commercial for it. And I was explaining to my wife that like some smart engineers actually had to create hardware and software that implemented machine learning algorithms. And I'm like explaining to my wife like how you have to train an algorithm. Like, they basically had to show it pictures of poop so it could identify poop. Like, it doesn't know if it saw a glass or a stuffed animal or whatever. It just knows that the glass on the floor of the stuffed animal is not poop. It knows how to identify poop, and they did that by showing it pictures of poop. And I posted it on Facebook, and someone else commented on Dave Kennedy's post and pulled a quote from iRobot's website that basically said, yes, like, we had to show it pictures of poop. Like, they actually did that. Like,
the GitHub poop stock photo library.
Like, where did they get pictures of poop? How do you recognize poop? Like, is it hard poop? Is it soft poop? Is it diarrhea poop?
All of them. You have to have all of them.
Is it puke? Like, how do you differentiate between puke and poop, because those are both things you don't want to run over with a Roomba vacuum. Like that. Again, the design meetings must have been like, how do you keep a straight face in those design meetings?
And Paul, my question is, I think you need to get one and do some empirical testing to see if it can determine between dog poop and human poop.
You have enough children that that could be okay. Everybody, drop them on the floor.
Well, the problem is, Doug, is that the child poop might be the same size as the dog poop, so we need an adult.
I mean, you're talking size, color, consistency. Like there are variables here that they had to take into account to come up with.
So somewhere there's a database. There's a database.
iRobot has a database of what poop
hashing.
Like unbelievable. Right, and it's probably a
hash of the hash of the poop. The poop hash. Yep. I think on that note that it's like, time probably.
Hashtag poop.
It's probably poop hash. That's the wrap.
Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening to this poop edition of Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and out of here.
Out.